Council meeting is now in session.
We don't have the light yet.
Oh,
Bring it nice and
I'm
closer.
not good at this.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, now the council meeting is in session. Thanks so much for all of you joining us. I'm Stephanie Ivy. I am the Mayor Pro Tem, and Mayor Wilkinson is out of town, so I'll do my best at running the meeting. If I need help, please feel free to point anything out to me. Can we start with the roll call? Make sure we've got
Meekum here.
McEwen here.
Ivy here.
Fillmore.
Okay, looks like we're,
And Bill's right
Oh.
there.
There we go.
and here comes Ince. Okay. Almost here. Great, we can start. We have a great privilege today. Mr. Rajan Zed is here to offer a prayer for us. I believe it's the first time that we've had a Hindu prayer as the beginning of our council meeting, so we welcome you.
It is an honor for our community when the prayers from ancient Sanskrit scriptures are being read in this great hall of democracy, the great city of Centerville. Starting with Gayatri Mantra, considered the most sacred mantra of Hinduism, I shall be reading from the ancient Hindu scriptures Rig Veda, Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita, some of them as old as 1500 before the Common Era. After reading in Sanskrit, I shall interpret in English. Can we all rise, please? Thank you. Om Bhurvuvah Swaha Tat Saviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Na Prachodayat. We meditate on the transcendental glory of the Deity Supreme, who is inside the heart of the earth, inside the life of the sky, and inside the soul of the heaven. May He stimulate and illuminate our minds. Astoma Sadgamya Tamsoma Jyotirgamya Mrityor Mamratam Gamya. Lead us from the unreal to the real, lead us from darkness to light, lead us from death to immortality. Tasmada Sakta Statam Karyam Karma Samachara Sakto Heacharan Karma Parma Pravati Purusha Karma Nevahi Samsiddhi Mastita Jankadya Loka Sangleha Mevapi Sampa Shankar Tumra Hasi. Strive constantly to serve the welfare of the world by devotion to selfless. One attains the supreme goal of life. Do your work with the welfare of others always in mind. Om Saha Navavatu, Saha Naubhanaktu, Saha Viryan Karva Bahai, Tejasvi Nava Ditamastu, Ma Vidvisa Bahai. May we be protected together, may we be nourished together, may we work together with great vigor, may our study be enlightening, may no obstacle arise between us. Samniva Akuti, Samna Hirdhyaniva, Samnamastu O Manu, Yathava Susahasti. United your resolve, united your hearts, may your spirits be at one, that you may long together dwell in unity and concord. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Om. Thank you.
Will you now please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we usually begin our council meetings with an open session, but due to the large number of visitors, I'd like to switch that around. We have had some new hires that we're going to introduce, so if we could start with Nare, and Jake, are you going to tell us about her and introduce her?
Nare, do you want to come up to the microphone so everybody can see you here? Sure. All right. Well, this is Nare Simmons. She just started yesterday. She grew up in Korea, and she's been in the U.S. for a little over 10 years, right?
Yes, that's
right?
correct.
Okay. Yeah, and that's her husband sitting right there, I'm assuming, right? Okay. Nare comes very qualified. She went to Salt Lake Community College where she got her associate's degree, and she's planning on, at this point, to transfer to the U to get her bachelor's in accounting. That's one of her plans. She's a very upbeat and positive person if you guys have met her. So, and maybe I'll just give her a minute or two to introduce herself. Anything else that you may want to say?
Oh, I didn't really plan
Well,
on.
I know you can
It's
talk.
okay, you
I know
already
you can
got the
talk,
job,
so I
so.
think you'll be fine.
So first, when I got a second interview, and Jacob was telling me they want to have a second interview, and it's going to be a really casual interview. And I thought that's really casual, but thank God I was wearing the right clothes, and I went to there, and there was our city manager here, Steve, was sitting there. I'm like, this isn't casual. What kind of casual is this? Anyway, I passed my test, and I'm here today. I'm from Korea. I grew up in there, and I've been in the United States, just like Jacob says, about 10 years. And I married a guy from Bountiful, so I'm kind of stuck. I'm so grateful that I got this job in Centerville. It's like 7 minutes driving away from home. Really, really, really looking forward to working with everybody.
Okay, and could you remind me what exactly your position is, just so everybody knows?
She is at our front desk.
At the front desk.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, we look forward to seeing more of you.
Yeah. Can I go back?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Okay, and Chief, would you like to do the honors in whichever order you want to?
Absolutely.
And I'm so excited for this.
Yes, me too. Thank you so much. And first off, on behalf of the men and women of Centerville Police Department, I really want to thank the community, the council, for all the support that's been shown to us over the last month, the month of May, during Police Week. It was incredible, and thank you all. Thank you so much. Thank you for the support, all the banners, the yard signs, the cookies, everything. So that was very awesome. We live in a great community, and it's nice to see the diversity here on display today with the opening prayer and as we go forward. So it's, as you know, we had an officer retire. So we had Assistant Chief Steenblick retire, and another officer went to work for JetBlue. So we had 2 openings that needed to be filled, and it's challenging to fill those positions anymore in law enforcement. But we did go through a process, which was a rigorous process, to hire 2 individuals, and I'm way excited about who we were able to get for our department. So I'd like to have Troy Cash and Holly Coombs come up and just stand right here if you don't mind for just a minute. So Troy, we were able to capture him from Davis County. Once again, we keep stealing from Davis County. He came out of the correctional facility there. He's got 3 years of experience there as a clerk and also as a correctional officer there. And thankfully, the council gave us permission to have an option to be able to send people through the academy. We're going to have to take that advantage of that, at least partially. He's got about half of the academy done, which allows him to be functional as an officer as long as he's in companionship with a regular officer that's been LEO certified. So we're going to be sending him through the academy, the rest of the academy, in July. But prior to working for Davis County, he also worked in security for Intermountain Healthcare for 2.5 years. He's been involved with a lot of customer care service type jobs and mental health, so that's very helpful for us. And are you still certified EMT? Certified EMT, and he's been working on a degree in behavioral science and a minor in criminal justice. So this is Troy Cash, and his husband Ricardo is here, and so we'll be pinning a badge on him in just a minute here. If you don't mind, I'd like to introduce Holly Coombs. If I can get this mic just kind of stay up here a little bit. So Holly is, we're very excited to have Holly. She is currently, well, not currently, now she works for us, but we just got her from Idaho. She was working up there in adult parole and probation. Prior to that, she was working in Utah for parole and probation. So she's got about 7 years of experience in law enforcement in that realm, which is very useful for what we need. She also did some schooling towards a nursing degree, but we're hoping to hold on to her for a long time. And we're very excited to have her here with us. She does have a fair amount of law enforcement experience. Her husband is also a law enforcement officer at the VA hospital. And so we're just really excited to have Holly here. I want you to know both of these candidates went through, again, a very rigorous application process with testing, psychological, physical, written, just a number of things, and we're very, very excited about having them on board with us. So what I'd like to do is invite, so Holly's mom, Terry, I think, is that who you would like to have? Oh, okay. So Ashlyn and Austin, would you mind coming up here real quick? And Ricardo? And we'd like to pin on the badges.
Now, are we going to swear them in?
Well, oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's get them sworn in.
Can we get them kind
do
of front
that.
and center?
Yeah, so do we, let's
There's a
have you
good
go right
empty
up over
space
here,
right up here.
right up in front. You guys can go up with them if you want, but we're just going to have them go up here and we're going to have them get sworn in.
Turn her in. You can, yep.
There you go.
We'll believe you. From the back.
My name is Mackenzie Wood. I'm the city recorder, and part of my job is to swear in officers. So if you'll raise your right arm to the square and repeat after me. I do solemnly swear that I will support, obey, and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of this state, and that I will discharge the duties of my office with fidelity.
Okay, so I believe we've got some badges to pin on here. Try not to poke them.
That nursing might come in handy.
That nursing training might have to, and the EMT training might come in useful.
That's just a vest check.
Yeah. Welcome aboard. Thank you. Thank you. You go ahead and take a seat. Thank you so much. We're excited. We're very excited about these two. So, again, as a result of our retirement, that created a domino effect with the assistant chief leaving, and that required some promotional activity to go on. So if we could maybe have Zan Robinson and Mike Dingman come up. Why don't you come on over here for just a minute. So we went through another testing process to fill these two positions, which was the lieutenant and a sergeant position. Again, it was a rigorous process. We used chiefs and administrators from other agencies to assist with this process. And in the case of the sergeant, written test, oral interviews, and we also did peer evaluations with both of these candidates, everybody that was testing, peer evaluations. And so we're excited to have these two here to receive their promotion officially, or I guess publicly in this case. Zan Robinson came to us 17 years ago. He worked as patrol and as a canine handler. And also he was an administrative sergeant for a number of years. He helped us quite a bit with 4th of July and Tour of Utah and so forth in the past. And he has been promoted to lieutenant, He has previous experience with Davis County Corrections and the state prison. So he worked both at the prison for 2 years and Davis County for 3 years, working in the jail. And he is married and an avid outdoorsman. His children are here. He's always spending lots of time with them, and I always refer to him as the Father of the Year. He needs to get that award every year. So Zan will be is being promoted to lieutenant, and Mike Dingman. Mike has been a patrol officer with us, and then he moved over into detectives. He's got 13 years of law enforcement experience. He was the lead investigating officer on the officer-involved shooting last July 4th. Did an outstanding job on that. In the detective division, he's done just an amazing job with all the fraud cases. In fact, they have files at the county attorney's office for all the cities for their cases. So you have like Layton, Clearfield, Farmington, and then you got Mike Dingman. And then you have Centerville, and then you have the other cities. So he produced a lot of paperwork for the county attorney's office, and they made their own file for him. He is also an arrest control instructor. Previous to law enforcement, he worked in the printing industry. He is married, has 3 kids, and so I present to you Lieutenant Robinson and Sergeant Dingman. And I would like to have those who were asked to Zan, your wife, Susan, and Mike, did you have Char coming up? Okay, yes, good. All right, so want me to hold on to that for a minute? You might need a helper. While they're doing that, good leadership is so critical in any organization, especially in law enforcement. And when we talk about our sergeants, they are the backbone of what happens out there in the field every day. They're in the trenches, they're with the troops, they're making lots of decisions every single day that are so critical. And so we obviously want to make sure we have the best people that we possibly can for those positions, and I can assure you these are extremely capable and qualified individuals for these positions, and are very, very dedicated, put in a lot of work. They're highly trained, very, very well skilled in what they do. So please join me in giving them a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, we had Mark Taggart is a new detective. He's not here tonight. That's not a rank advancement, but it is a different assignment.
Great. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. And I would love to have you all stay. But you don't have to if you don't want to.
We can say the budget word and you'll all just go. You see, it worked.
All right, well, after that great start, we now have the opportunity for an open session for anyone in the community to bring items to our attention, items of interest or concern or whatever else. We do have a couple of public hearings later on this evening, so if you're here to talk about the budget or you're here to talk about fence heights, the time for that is later. But if you have something else to say, we would love to hear from you now, and limit your comments to about 2 minutes, please. Is there anyone who would like to speak? Okay. Seeing none, I'll close the open session, and we'll go on to the minutes review and acceptance. We have minutes for the May 8th work session, the May 15th City Council meeting and work session, and the May 22nd joint City Council and Planning Commission work session, and the May 29th work session. We've been very busy with the budget, so that's why we've got several work sessions there. Are there any changes you wanted to make?
I'll move that we approve all of those stated May minutes.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That passes. Okay. Lisa, would you like to tell us about the interlocal agreement?
Yes, I'm very excited about this one.
I'm excited too.
We're glad to have this on the agenda for you. I think as the council knows, we have had a long relationship with Davis County providing our dispatch services for our emergency services. And we've been very happy with the quality of those dispatch services, but there were some technical issues with timing because we have some of our calls, our fire and EMS calls go through Bountiful, and then our police were going through Davis County. So the police chief made this a priority when he became chief and has researched this and determined that it's in the best interest of the city to go with Bountiful for both of our emergency dispatch services. And as we have previously brought this to the council, we've also discussed this with Davis County, initially going to them in January to give them plenty of time to deal with the transition. And so the agreement with Davis County expires June 30th, 2018, and so we would like to enter into this new agreement with Bountiful to be effective July 1, 2018. And so Bountiful has prepared this interlocal agreement for those dispatch services. We've reviewed that here internally and made a few suggested changes, and we pulled a few more provisions that were in the Davis County agreement. But staff is satisfied with this agreement. Oh, good, the chief is back. And the chief may want to speak to this as well. This is a significant issue for the city, but one that we're looking forward to, this new relationship with Bountiful.
Jake, are we a little light on the mics? I'm not hearing a lot of stuff.
I can check the
I
volume.
don't know if you can you hear us okay out there? Because it seems pretty quiet today.
Chief, before you speak, Lisa, did you see the email late today from Bountiful City Attorney?
No, I did not.
Well, I got a phone call about 6:30 from their city manager. I was at the park, the family activity, so I only have the benefit of a brief conversation with him. But he said that their city attorney sent you an email regarding a change that they'd like to make in the agreement. He apologized that it was so late that he was getting involved. And I said, well, if we need to, we can postpone this 2 more weeks. That's why we wanted to get it before the council tonight in case council had some reasons to postpone it. But
Right. Okay, it looks
So maybe
like
why
we got an email at 6:30. Sorry, I was probably walking
Can we
up here.
just table this to later in the meeting so you have time to digest it and tell us if it's a substantive change or not? I mean, with attorneys, that's always a tough call if it's substantial or not, but if it appears to...
Or maybe you can read it and digest
Right.
it while we hear from both our chiefs that are here
Yeah,
on
he
how this
said
will impact.
their city managers just informed him that he would prefer the fee just being set by Bountiful, and then we can discuss if there's any issues with Centerville. So anyway, yeah, we may need to look into what they're requesting, but Chief, if you wanted to speak to it, I'll take a look at this email.
Yeah, so this was a decision that was not taken lightly, and it's been something that I've been mulling over ever since I became chief, and even before that, we've been talking about it for a number of years. And there became some real compelling reasons that I felt we needed to make a change. There has been good reason to go to Bountiful Dispatch for some time. but they have not had the infrastructure there that, in my opinion, was able to handle the amount of volume of traffic, radio traffic, and calls and so forth that we generate. And so for me, that was a non-starter. They didn't have the ability to run that. They've recently gone through and updated their entire dispatch center, added consoles. It is state-of-the-art now, so they have the infrastructure. So that took that big issue away. The other very compelling reason had to do with the delay that it was causing when you have someone calling 911 needing EMS or fire services, and that 911 call would go to Davis County Sheriff's Office, and then it would have to be routed back to Bountiful for them to dispatch out. I thought that we were in good shape there for a period of time due to some operational software that they put together. But in talking with Chief Bassett several months ago, I found that he had been tracking it, and the delay was still quite significant and alarming to me. And so that was a very compelling issue that we needed to get those fire and EMS services dispatched sooner. And the delay was caused because we're going through two dispatch centers. There are other important things that I took into consideration. Geographically, our border touches West Bountiful and Bountiful more than it does Farmington. And although we interact with all the agencies around us, most of our activity is basically from Chase Lane south. And so our backups are closer from Bountiful and West Bountiful than they are coming from the north. We train significantly with all the agencies in the south, and now we're on the same SWAT team. We've got a lot of stuff, interagency operations going on with these other agencies. And so we're the only agency on this side of the county, other than Farmington, that is not dispatched through Bountiful. So this will bring us over their Bountiful dispatches for the EMS services for Centerville. So that'll bring that into harmony, and I think it just made sense to make this change. It is a big change for us. It will have an impact on different things, but I think it'll be a good impact. So, and I don't know if the Chief Bassett wants to cover.
So maybe I could add what I learned from their city manager. The reason he called is he said that this agreement requires an annual new agreement every year, which he was hoping to avoid. He doesn't have that with any of the other cities. What happens with the other cities is the managers agree that if the increase is reasonable, if subject to the budget appropriation by the respective city councils. Is that the way they approach it with the fire district chief? So you don't take a new agreement every year to the fire board, do you? You discuss, here's what the increase and whether if it's reasonable, and then it's all subject to approval of the budget, right? So that's the essence of what he was describing. He said if he doesn't want us to treat us, he doesn't want to deal with us differently than he deals with the others in regards to that issue. So
That makes sense.
if you want to delay this, that's fine while we look at it more carefully, but that's the essence of his request.
And we do have our current agreement with the Davis County Sheriff's Office ends on the end of this month, the last day of this month. So after that, we won't have an agreement with them.
So is this going to replace our own internal dispatch, or
No.
will we still have internal dispatch during the
Yes.
business hours, 8 to
Yes.
5?
Yep.
But they don't receive 911 calls, though.
Right. We do not receive 911 calls here. There's not a PSAP center. It's very minor dispatching that we do out of here. It's walk-ins and keys locked in and people that have our phone number that call us for whatever. But it's very minor things that were dispatched out of here.
So it's got a $40,000 price tag in here. How does that compare to where we were with Davis County?
It's identical.
Same.
It's just exactly the same.
Now, Chief, you were checking to make sure that everything would be compatible? We wouldn't need more
Yes.
updates?
So there was a concern brought to me by Mayor Wilkinson that we might have to spend a bunch of money for software, hardware, which didn't make any sense to me. So I did some checking and talked with Chief Bassett. I guess a concern was raised because of the situation with South Davis Metro Fire on how they're going to have to handle some changes that Bountiful's making. So Bountiful is making a change in their mobile application. Currently, their dispatch center uses the software called eForce, and they use FatPot, which is what we use for our mobile application. So in our police cars run around, the records management system is FatPot. And Bountiful's going to switch over completely to eForce, all of their patrol cars. My understanding from Chief Bassett is that you were kind of piggybacking on what Bountiful had going there, but because they're changing, you've got to kind of get your own system. We got it all up this time. Yeah, so they've got to we've already got our system, so South Davis Metro, because of this change, is going to have to develop or obtain a system that will interoperate with Bountiful. Our system currently interoperates with Bountiful, and that should not change. And that's part of the agreement. I wanted to make sure that was in there, that it would interoperate.
Okay, great.
Is that correct?
Yeah, it just requires us to have a mobile solution. We use FatPot just like all the police departments do, but we've been using it for free for a really long time. So, fire guys. So, the requirement we had there was an increase to us, but we are not putting that increase through budget. We're doing it through other revenue to cover that expense. But we have to bring on a mobile platform for all of our units to see the calls coming in. So we are going with the eForce mobile solution. The reason we have an option, we currently use FatPot, and we can continue with that. The problem is that laptops that go in fire trucks are very expensive, to the tune of about $5,000 each. And I have cut all those out of our system, and we just use iPads. And that has significantly reduced our cost. However, FatPot software will not work with an iPad. Will not. So my requirement, or my only solution, is really to go with eForce. And so that's why we had an increase, and that's probably what Mayor Wilkinson was talking about. So.
Okay, that makes sense.
So I'm fine with that change if the council is. Again, it doesn't require, the term currently doesn't require a new agreement. It just requires an amendment that the fee adjustment comes to the council. They're requesting that the city managers just handle that as part of the budget. I'm perfectly fine with that. If the council's fine, I would want some time to deal with the language. So if you could just direct staff to come up with language that's acceptable, and if it's not, we'll bring it back to you on the 19th. But I think you could approve it with that change if it's acceptable to you.
So in looking over the agreement, really we're talking about under the compensation.
Yes, number
A
3C. 3C, where it says the parties may agree to adjustments. So they're just going to say something about that being as part of the budget process or as approved by the city managers annually.
Subject to
Sound like
budget.
they had objection to A as well, with us setting the price by.
A lot of this, well, I'm looking at my red lines, but initially they wanted a one-year contract, a one-year term with a 12-month termination clause. And I said, okay, then how do we ever have negotiating power at the time that we change the fee? So the chief and I recommended back to them a 5-year term with a 6-month renewal, Because with Davis County, they're on a calendar year budget. So we do have some time to think about it and put it in our budget. But now that we're going with another city, our budget process are simultaneous. So we're both going, you know, they have the same problem. If we pull out, how do they know? So I can see why they wanted the 12-month, because they're going to be hiring new people. But anyway, we agreed on a 5-year term with a 6-month termination, because I think if we don't like the fee increase, you know, we can give them notice at that point, and I think that's sufficient. But we're hoping for a very long and wonderful relationship with them, and that we won't be dealing with these terms, but this is, you know, what attorneys are supposed to do, is look at the worst case scenario. So anyway, I'm fine with what they're suggesting, to do it as part of the budget. I think that makes sense, particularly if that's the way they do it with all their other communities. And obviously, it will be coming to the council as part of the budget. You're still part of that process. So.
And it really is, in terms of timing, similar to the county, because the county, being on the calendar year, would give us the new rates in the fall, when our budget was already adopted, and they would be effective January. So the second 6 months, we would be under the new rates anyway.
Yeah.
I'm fine if we have the staff direction to go back and renegotiate the language of the compensation clause. The rest of it, I like the fact that it's 5 years. I was actually going to call that out, that given what a critical service it is, short term doesn't make any sense to me. If it could go longer, that'd be great. If there was some price locking that could take place, that'd be even better. No, that's not likely, because they're controlled by software vendors and other outside parties, but that's great that we have the 5-year term.
And part of the contract negotiation, when we were talking to Bountiful, we asked for their previous 5 to 7 year cost. They gave us a spreadsheet on costs that they've been charging other municipalities. So we have reviewed, and they've been pretty stable.
Their history.
Very stable.
Great.
That's great.
I'm a little surprised that the amount would be an even $40,000. How long has it been that rate?
So the county, we've gone through a few different formulas with the county. And they did, for a period of time, they were doing it per call. So the number of calls, they would charge us X amount per call. And then there was some inequity because they were charging, they were dispatching for fire departments throughout the county, not South Davis, but other fire departments. And Chief Worsley actually worked some negotiation with the county. He felt like their billing services were unfair, the way they were doing that. And that's probably been 5 years ago. And they came up with a pretty good system. The problem with the calls, so every time an officer goes out on something and tells dispatch, hey, I'm out on the stop or out on whatever, they would generate a call. Well, if we're being charged by the call, that could be a chilling effect to the officer going out with dispatch, which is an officer safety issue. We want our officers to go out with dispatch on everything that they're going out on. And so we decided, that's a poor way to do it. So let's look at the population. So it was a fee schedule set up according to population. And
wasn't it number of officers also? Or?
Maybe it was a number of officers.
Yeah, I think that was a factor.
Yeah, maybe it was the officers. That's right. It
was
the number of officers. That's correct.
They didn't want us.
Yeah, because because of the business element in different cities. So yeah, we came up with this formula, the number of officers, and they would charge a certain amount per officer. And so that's where we finally landed on, and it's like $39,940 or something right now.
42, pretty close.
Yeah, so. We just said 40,000. That's what we budget every year. We budget 40,000, and that's what Bountiful said they would come in at.
So if you've probably figured out, there's no formula underlying the 40,000. It's just they wanted us to come over. They agreed to take us for the same amount we were paying the county. You probably realize, though, that the big plum they want is the 911 fees. Those are several times the $40,000, right?
Yes. Yeah, so they're going to get a fairly large sum of money coming to them from the 911 fees.
How much, Chief?
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows?
Not until they
Legislative change this year.
Not until they start receiving them. Yeah, but every phone line basically has a charge a 911 fee charge, and only the vendors know, and they're not required to tell us. But as soon as they start paying it, then they'll know how much it is. We can estimate. You can get an estimate on how much it is, but.
So did the county get the 911 fees in the past?
Yes, they're going to be losing those 911 fees. Yeah, so the county's going to be hurting. The county is currently down, well, last time I checked, they were down 12 dispatchers. So they were really struggling in their dispatch center. So they may not have to replace as many now, but.
Well, I think this will be a positive change, and I move that we accept resolution number 2018-17 regarding the interlocal agreement with Bountiful City for police dispatch services, with the giving staff the ability to change the compensation section as discussed.
Did you, subject to the budget appropriation, did you say that?
Yeah. Subject
As discussed.
Oh, okay.
As discussed.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. We should roll call on this one, right, Lisa? Okay. Yes.
Aye.
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 That's unanimous. Great.
Thank you.
Chief, you did mention that the county is down dispatchers. Is Bountiful
Bountiful
also
is
down?
currently fully staffed, but they're going to be hiring 2 more dispatchers to take over us.
Okay.
And they're in the process right now of doing that hiring.
But they're not having the trouble, it's not trouble finding people? that might-
Apparently they have less of an issue there.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and I have to tell you, we have excellent relationships. We have excellent relationships with both. But we have very, very good relationships with Bountiful, and this is going to be a good fit.
Great. Well, I'm excited. All right. We're not even very far behind. This is excellent.
Good job.
Okay. Lisa, I believe you're up for the temporary judges as well.
Yes, I received a request from our Justice Court Judge, Judge Miller, to review the way we appoint temporary Justice Court judges. So this would be in the case where he's not available, he might be on vacation, or in the case of a conflict of interest where he has to recuse himself. So, and his request was based upon a recent, the Justice Court have a presiding judge that has requested that each Justice Court judge review the temporary Justice Court judge policy in their city and send him a copy of that resolution along with his or her standing order for the appointment of these. So we did this last year where we appointed 5 specific Justice Court judges, and we said these 5 judges can fill in for Judge Miller. What they're requesting now is a slightly broader resolution that just mirrors the statutory language that says we can appoint any Justice Court judge within Davis County or the adjacent city, or a senior judge, whoever meets the statutory language can be appointed as a temporary Justice Court judge in Centerville City. And then what the judge would like to do, based upon recommendation from the presiding judge, is then have a standing order that actually lists the specific judges. And then he will basically, there has to be a random, or, you go in order. You can't just pick which judge. That's the whole purpose of this, is so that, the judges are picked and assigned beforehand. So I'm supportive of his request to move forward in this essentially more flexible program so that he can get those 2 documents to the presiding judge as requested. And so we prepared a new resolution, 2018-16, that again will just say we're allowed to appoint Justice Court judges. And then based upon this new resolution, our Justice Court Judge Miller will issue a standing order with some specific names. So we recommend.
And then we just adopt that.
The judge just issues that standing
Okay.
order. It doesn't come back to you. So you're giving him that authority with Section 1 of the appointment authority. It still has, those judges on the list have to meet these qualifications. And essentially he's going to list a few, and then the last option is going to be, or any other judge that meets this statutory requirement.
Okay. Any other questions?
I would make a motion that we approve Resolution 2018-16 for the revision of the process for appointing temporary justice court judges for the Centerville Justice Court.
I'll second that.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Do we need a roll call, or?
You can do a roll call on that.
Okay. Bill, let's start with you.
Aye.
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 That's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, item 5. This is the reason you probably came. The fiscal year 2019 budget. Steve, would you like to start us out?
Okay, thank you. State law requires that you conduct a public hearing on the tentative budget. I submitted to the council my proposed budget, the first meeting in May, as required by law. The council later adopted the proposed budget as the tentative budget, with the understanding that we were still working through the issues and there were likely to be revisions to the tentative budget. And there are a number of those that I've put on a summary for tonight to review. I would characterize those as proposed or tentative revisions because the council still may change some of those revisions and may have other revisions to the tentative budget before they adopt on June 19th a final budget. So please keep that in mind as these matters are presented tonight. One of the requirements of the law, state law, is that a part of the public hearing be opportunity for public comment regarding the compensation of appointed officials. And that would include most of the department heads and the city manager and the judge. There's some specific guidelines pertaining to the judge, which I put a letter in front of you tonight regarding that. And it's also, the letter from the state courts is on the Novus now as of today, providing those guidelines regarding the judge. Also, to be the subject of a public hearing is any change in compensation for the elected officials. The city council discussed that matter in one of their work sessions and agreed that there would not be an increase in the elected officials' compensation this year. In regards to the appointed officials, all of the appointed officials other than the judge are part of what we call the city's compensation plan. The compensation plan consists of 3 parts. The first part is salary administration guidelines. Second part is the pay grade schedule, showing what pay grades the positions are assigned to. And the third part then is the pay scales, or the ranges, the pay ranges, showing what the minimums and maximums of those pay ranges are for the various pay grades. So by looking at the pay grade schedule, you see what grade the position is assigned to. The pay grade scale shows what the pay range is. This is pretty common or typical for governmental entities to have that approach. The pay raises for each of those employees, which includes management and non-management employees, includes the appointed officials other than the judge, are governed by the salary administration guidelines. And there's several key points in those salary administration guidelines. Do you want to pull those up, Jake? What he's going to project is actually last year's salary administration guidelines marked up with the proposed changes for this year. One of the elements of the guidelines is to indicate what the market adjustment would be to the pay ranges. That's a result of doing a benchmark comparison every year with similar positions. We have about a dozen positions that are compared with other cities of comparable size within a comparable range, I would say. Actually, the non-management positions are compared even with the bigger cities. The big cities and the small cities all get compared with, because those non-management positions, the competition includes all of those cities. When we compare with the management positions, it's the smaller cities that are compared to because of Centerville's size. As a result of making the comparison with that group of dozen benchmark positions that are essentially non-management positions, we concluded that generally speaking, there's not a need for a pay range adjustment, or what we call a market adjustment. So that's why you see on the first page of the guidelines that I've marked in no change this year in terms of a market adjustment. The market adjustment would be 0. However, the benchmark analysis did show that our police officer positions do need to be adjusted range-wise to keep them competitive. So I recommended to the City Council that the police officer 1, 2, 3, and sergeant positions each move up 1 pay grade, which is a 5% adjustment in the pay range for those positions in order to meet our competitive target. Regarding the management positions, we have shown for the last several years that the management positions are substantially below the market, the average out there in cities of comparable size. And I have brought this to the council's attention for several years. This year the numbers are particularly, I think, notable. The amount below market, below average for those cities that we're comparing with. I suggested to the council that they could approach this 2 ways. One is they could hire a consultant, bring a consultant in to do a thorough review, an analysis of every position, establish possibly a new compensation plan based on that analysis, or we could do a temporary fix, at least for now, in regards to the management positions. Jake, would you bring up the management benchmark chart? And it was, let's show that.
Where is that one?
That would be in maybe it's not in there. Maybe we didn't put it in. Is it part of the? It's not on there. Okay. Anyway, it's not on there. It's would be found on the online with the work session that we had just last week and prior work sessions as well. But the management positions, if you're comparing to the 50th percentile, all of the management positions were double-digit below that average. And so I recommended to the council that as kind of an interim fix, we make a 2 pay grade adjustment to those positions, which is a 10% adjustment to those pay ranges, the minimum and the maximum. Now that doesn't mean those employees get 10% raises. That means the minimum and the maximum of the pay ranges are adjusted that amount. And what that does is still leave most of those positions below the average. So I felt that it was a reasonable recommendation to make as an interim step, pending the possibility that the council would bring in a compensation consultant at some point to do a more careful, thorough review. There are a few other positions that I informed the council in a recent work session needed to be reevaluated. And those are showing on the pay grade schedule in a highlighted fashion. Do you have that on there? Well, let's stick with the guidelines for right now. Okay. Let's stick with the guidelines, but all the proposed changes, all the proposed new grades, I should say, are on that schedule. Regarding the salary administration guidelines, the heart of it is the pay matrix. if you would show that, Jake. We have no cost of living increases in our compensation plan. So for example, if there were a market adjustment to the pay range, which many cities will call a cost of living adjustment, yes, that market adjustment adjusts the pay range, but it does not add an additional increase to the employee. The employee's salary is determined by these guidelines, and it's based on where they fall in the pay range. The pay range is divided into 4 quarters. We call them quartiles. The lowest quarter being the first quartile, the highest quarter being the 4th quartile. And the percent that an employee is eligible for is determined in part by which part of the pay range they're in, and in part by their performance as evaluated by their department head. The lower in the range, the greater the percentage that an employee is eligible for potentially, because they're learning the job, their increased value each year incrementally, at least from my viewpoint, is greater than somebody who's been getting increases and is moving up in the pay range. The percentage goes down. Of course, as they're up higher in the pay range, then they are making more, and that's representing the increased value to the city based on that experience. The judge is a unique situation as established by state law. Carves out the judge for particular guidelines, specific guidelines in state law. Says that every justice court judge, a part-time justice court judge is compared to a full-time district judge, and is supposed to receive if it was a full-time justice court judge, would receive between 50 and 90% of the salary for a district court judge. If the justice court judge is part-time, as ours is, then we receive from the state a factor that indicates how much of an equivalent of a full-time judge our judge is. And then that is multiplied times that 50 to 90% range and gives us a range in which our judge is supposed to be paid. Our judge is deemed this year to be 0.45. Last year it was 0.41, equivalent of full-time. The law says that not only does the judge's salary have to fall within that pay range, but it also has to equal or exceed the average pay raise for other employees. So the judge isn't governed under these guidelines other than I looked to this pay matrix that was displayed to as a basis for recommending what would be an average. If the council was approving an average pay range for a pay raise for the judge, what would it be? The percentages in that matrix for the merit range are the same percentages as last year. Last year, based on that, I recommended a 3% increase for the judge. I'm recommending that again because the percentages for that merit range are the same. That would be my recommendation for the council to consider. I think you understand that it's all governed by those criteria. But I will say that I think our judge does a fine job. I have no concerns about our judge. Sometimes our police officers think he's maybe a little too easy. Sometimes, right, Chief? But generally speaking, I think he does a fine job as our judge. Unless you want me to answer further questions, this may be one of those matters you want to have further discussion on either later in the meeting or in a work session, and that's fine. But I thought I should present that much information for the benefit of the public hearing here. Now, we have a summary of proposed revisions, which I have put online. And if you would like, I will walk through those fairly quickly if I can,
That'd be great.
so that the public will be aware of those. Jake, you got it up there, okay. Again, even though I was trying to interpret the council's position on this, the majority position on these matters, they may not ultimately agree to these. That's yet to be known for sure, but here's what I perceived was kind of a support from a majority of the council without binding them to that, okay? The sales tax revenue projection, we reduced by about $60,000 based on the last couple of months of actual distribution. Caused us to tone down our projection of sales tax revenue. I've noted the page numbers here, council, if you want to go to those pages and see where those would go. Administrative service charges. This increased from the amounts that you total up in the tentative budget to what I'm proposing as a change. It actually increases by about $11,000, the administrative service charges. Those are the charges to other funds other than the general fund to pay back to the general fund a fair portion of the administrative services of the general fund. So it's an inter-fund transfer to pay for the share of those services.
And Steve, that's the net of the RDA. That's the net, right?
That's
so
the net.
RDA is one way and the other thing
Yes,
else.
that's right. I reduced the RDA administrative service charge, but the enterprise fund service charge is increased such that it's a total of increase of about 11,000. You see there, 10 or 11,000. The revisions, proposed revisions would include a $40,000 contingency under the control of the City Council, increased funding for equipment replacement by taking $100,000 of the surplus from the current fiscal year, the anticipated surplus, and adding that to the $200,000 of funding, new funding in the new fiscal year in the Streets Department to begin a serious effort to update, replace the heavy equipment fleet. You notice that there's 3 numbers in this general fund section that are red. And then I have a 4th number that is red. That's the last bullet under the general fund, which shows the designated use of $234,000 of current fiscal year surplus. And my suggestion is that we look to what is that funding versus new revenue funding. I would suggest that you consider the $40,000 contingency, the $100,000 additional for equipment, and the $100,000 contribution to the fund balance coming out of that surplus in the current year. I will remind you that the current budget has already in it a $100,000 increase to fund balance. And in estimating what the current year surplus would be, we accounted for that $100,000 as if it was spent for that purpose, set aside for that purpose. So, designate $80,000 as a personnel contingency to fund retirement. We have a number of retirements in this new fiscal year with accumulated leave to be paid out, and then we have the annual cash out of leave that you're familiar with. Designated 5% of the transportation fund revenue for sidewalk repair. There was a substantial discussion by the council in their most recent work session in which they appeared to agree that we needed to allocate much more money for sidewalk repair, all those yellow stripes you see on the sidewalks throughout the town. This will be a significant increase in the funding for that. 5% of the transportation fund revenue is $69,880. In addition to that, there is $25,000 in the general fund for street repairs, for sidewalk repairs. So you're getting close to that $100,000 number. I just realized that bullet should have gone down on the second page. That's not general fund. That should go down under transportation fund. I said it twice there, didn't I? I put it under both.
It's all right.
Steve, can we go back really quick just to the 80,000 as
Sure.
personnel contingency? That is just cash out. That doesn't cover any overlap of personnel. So if we have an announced retirement date, if we overlap positions, this is not covering that additional salary cost.
That's correct.
Okay.
Right, right. Okay, then we updated the personnel sections to reflect the distribution of $140,000 to fund the pay matrix, including a 1% bonus pool. We updated all health insurance, employee health insurance line items by the 7% increase in the cost of that. It's actually 6.75%. We used a 7% in doing that. We may have an employee who changes from single to couple or couple to family. That would help us in that regard. And the chief sitting back there, he'll be pleased to hear this. I actually spilled the beans to him already on this, though, the police chief. The council went above and beyond his request in this regard and appears to agree that we designate an additional $75,000 for police department additional pay raises to bring our officers up to a competitive point that we can hang on to them. And that includes the payroll-related benefits, retirement, FICA, et cetera, as being paid out of that number. And then the last bullet under general fund is the amount needed from the current year surplus to balance those other actions. The estimated surplus at this point for the current fiscal year is $273,000 approximately. I'm not completely confident in that number, and so I would recommend you not program the use of all of that. I think we need to stick around that number that I'm showing there in order to, until we close out the year and see what we actually have as surplus in the current year.
Now, Steve,
Yeah.
when you're saying balancing the budget, this is one-time money for these one-time.
Yes, right. Yes, good point,
funds.
Jake. That's why I made these red ones. I viewed those as one-time kind of things that doesn't,
It's not an ongoing.
not an ongoing operating cost, which seems to be an appropriate use of surplus from the current year. Under the RAP tax fund, we revised the RAP tax revenue estimate downward a little bit, consistent with what we did with sales tax, and corresponding reductions in the expenditure section of the RAP tax fund, the 85%, 5%, 5%, 5% distribution that you had in place. Those all went down some. The other, there's a 5% to be determined. That's the last 5% in the 85,555. The last 5 is 5% contingency or to be determined. So the 7,500 for the park, half of the park cost of the Parks Master Plan comes out of the 5% contingency or to be determined of the RAP tax money. Under capital Parks Capital Improvement Fund, I have, we propose that you show in the final budget adoption the assumption of 55 multifamily units. That's half of the units on the west side in the Wright development over there, the Legacy Commons development. I think it's going to take you probably a couple of years for that to build out, so my guess was assume a half during this next fiscal year. And 10 homes is probably realistic. I don't think that's excessive as a projection. And so you can see the number that that generates as far as park impact fees as a source of revenue in this fund. reduced the transfer from the RAP tax fund to this $359,000, again, because of the reduction of the RAP tax estimate. This is the 85% of the projected RAP tax that's transferred over into the Parks Capital Improvement Fund to pay for the obligations there, park improvements. We would propose you show in the budget, the final budget, $306,000 in grant funds. That assumes that half of the Land and Water Conservation Fund grants will flow to the city during this fiscal year, and the other half after this fiscal year, because I anticipate construction would occur throughout next calendar year. Of course, you have to take out the state's administrative fee, and then after that's taken out and you go half, what's remained, that's how you get that number. And this also assumes that the $1.3 million for the Island View Phase 1, that half of that will be spent in the next fiscal year and the other half spent following fiscal year. We would show the $50,000 for the pavilion being spent out of the new year. Those materials have been ordered, but won't be here until the end of June, so it's really going to be constructed in July. And then we show $158,000, or propose to show $158,000 in that fund as kind of the plug, if you will, to represent the difference between the total revenue and the budgeted expenditures identified above. That's going to be used for, there's definitely a use for that, but how much of that that would go towards the perhaps completing the payoff of the current community park expansion or repaying a portion of the loan from the rec district. You know, I haven't pegged it to a certain scenario, but then we also have that issue of the wetlands mitigation that I've informed you of. So it's, for now, it's just identified as a lump sum there to be determined how it will be used. In the transportation fund, I've mentioned this, the 5% designated for sidewalk repairs. In the water fund and the drainage utility fund, the personnel lines would be adjusted per the pay matrix and the health insurance cost increase. The general fund administrative service charge amounts would be adjusted per the updated spreadsheet that I think is attached to Novus. And then there would be in both funds, the water fund and the drainage utility fund, a capital projects number that represents the remaining funds that are available for capital projects. In the Whitaker fund, the transfer from the general fund would be increased from $40,152 to $43,765 to make up for the earlier mistake in calculating what that transfer should be, but also to cover pay raises and related benefits. Reduce 5% transfer from the RAP tax fund, as I mentioned earlier, slightly reduced there. Then added the brochures and laptop accessories to the equipment and projects detail. Those are the costs that would be funded out of the undesignated fund balance within the Whitaker fund, part of it coming from the current fiscal year that they didn't spend, and part of it from prior fiscal years that's accumulated as surplus, undesignated surplus. So it took a long time. Thanks for your patience, but I thought we probably ought to get that out there before you start your public hearing. And then one final thing before your public hearing starts would be the sanitation rates. Jake, do you want to explain those? Put those up there. Yeah. We did recently rebid the solid waste collection services. The successful bidder was the current contractor, Ace Disposal, but the rates do change somewhat, and Jake, you explain those, would you?
Yeah, so what I did here is it's really a cost basis on what we need to charge to cover the cost for each of the types of service. So solid waste and green waste going up north, and then recycling extra going to the recycling facility. And you can see here that we have the customers, the amount that's charged by our provider by ACE, as well as any of the tipping fees, and this is what the rate is right now for those tipping fees. And we built in there as well a contingency for any changes in any of the administrative costs or in the tipping fees if there's an increase, that sort of thing. So on a cost basis, the proposed rate for solid waste actually goes down, as well as for the extra goes up a little bit. Green waste goes up because originally we were, I don't know if we were intentionally doing it, but we were subsidizing the green waste with the other cans. And so now this actually reflects what it costs.
When we instituted the green waste, the council at that time decided to use some surplus that existed in the sanitation fund to subsidize that somewhat. Well, that surplus is gone, so we need to get it back to real cost.
Right, and then the recycling goes up a little bit there, about 40 cents. And you can see the changes there.
So
All right.
with that, these rates would become effective in July.
So if you look
Fiscal
at it, if you had a solid waste can and a recycling can, which is the majority, actually goes down 6 cents.
Yeah.
So,
That's not bad.
yeah.
Okay, thank you. With that, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Any of you who would like to comment on the tentative budget for fiscal year 2019, please feel free to do so.
Rick, I know you're just waiting to get up.
Didn't want to be first. Or the only.
No, you just keynote. Well, I'm sure you won't be the only one.
I thought there would be no parking and no seating in here because of the discussion tonight, so. And I'm glad we have law enforcement here, so.
And we do want you to state your name. Sorry about that.
I am Rick Bingham. I live at 290 East Casa Loma Drive in Centerville. I have reviewed the insert that was sent out in the most recent billing, and I appreciated having this and reviewing it. I wanted to congratulate the City Council on approving some money for sidewalk repair. And I wondered if there was any consideration given to a fund that would be matching money from residents, and if that is a part of this or how that works. Could we double this
By having residents pay some?
Yeah, pay more money?
Yes, I have suggested that we do have matching funds available. I don't know exactly what it's going to be yet.
Yeah, the details are yet to be worked out.
The details are yet to come, but there will, I feel pretty good about that. There will probably be some matching funds.
Okay.
We just have to come up with the administrative guidelines to ensure fairness of how that would be distributed.
That'd be a good idea to do that.
Yeah, Rick, this bump up to this amount was just a directive of the council in the work session a week ago. Strong sentiment that we needed to increase. We have $25,000 in the current budget that we spent for sidewalk grinding, and that was 3 times what we had 2 years ago. So we made that step up. The council wanted to make even a much bigger step up and address within the next few years all of these faults.
We've almost 4 times.
Good, good. I think Steve would agree that street and sidewalk maintenance is city management 101, right? Looks like we're falling way behind in that area. So, I just wanted to make a general comment about some of this language in here, and it says an increase in the property tax levy of $217. Due to this action, significant progress has been made in stabilizing the city's financial position. Just as a general statement, this sounds like let's spend and then tax. Let's spend and then tax, instead of living within the budget. And so, of course, you can make things better by increasing taxes, I guess, on the books, but it doesn't float well, I think, with the public as we see tax increases on. And I see there are no tax increases in the property tax or levy being considered for this year. So that's a positive thing. So just in reviewing this, I see that about 6.5% of our city budget is going to debt service for Utopia and the Performing Arts Center. I was curious on the 2.9% for Utopia. Is that just for the debt service, or does that include other funds?
That is the percentage of the total budget that would be represented by our annual payment to Utopia, which is 480, this next year is 480,000 approximately.
Yeah. But what I'm asking is that servicing the debt that Utopia has, or are we paying, for a while we were paying some administrative money
it was
for
an
the
operating
operation of Utopia?
Yeah, that's not been, there's been no operational assessment for a couple of years now, and they are telling us that they don't expect that there will be in the future operational assessments.
Okay.
No, I stepped in, maybe George should have answered that.
No, that's the right answer. The Utopia debt service will continue, in my opinion, until the bonds are retired. UIA, which is where the operational assessments came from, has reached a point in their life cycle where they believe that they can start repaying some of the operational expenses back to the cities. However, where Centerville did not true up with them at the time, we actually withheld a payment on operational expenses. In UIA's mind, Centerville still owes them, so any repayments go against the debt of the operational assessments that Centerville did not pay. So
really?
we don't, there is no retirement of the existing obligation by UIA for what operational assessments were paid out by the city. And I for the life of me, I can't think of the number right now for the total that was paid to UIA.
By the city?
By the city for operational expenses.
200,000 approximately. Something.
So at some future point, UIA is indicating that money would come back to the city.
Since this Utopia debt is a substantial amount and significantly impacts our city revenue and budget, there for a while, Mayor Cutler threatened to do a monthly review of what's going on with Utopia, and then that kind of stopped. I thought it would be very helpful for the city and for the public, the citizens of Centerville, to know exactly where we're at in terms of our Utopia involvement, how many subscribers we have in the city, and so forth. And if we reviewed that on a regular basis, I think it would be a means for the city council to be guided in decisions and the retirement of that debt eventually, I hope. But I would like to suggest that both for Utopia and for the Performing Arts Center. I don't know how much we're having to pay in there cash-wise. It looks like a pretty substantial amount. And I'm kind of confused about that. It says that that's coming out of paid by the RDA. Is that 100%
could I speak
by RDA?
Could I speak to that? Yeah, when the debt was structured for the Performing Arts Center, when it was issued, the debt payment schedule was structured to fit certain revenue streams, certain revenue sources. It was only a 13-year payback period, by the way, which is extremely short for a facility of that nature. And the first 8 years of that 13 years, the debt service was being paid for by the RAP tax, property tax, or RDA tax increment, I should say, the redevelopment agency tax increment, we'll call it. We also had some contributions from the county, from tourism taxes. Then we had about $500,000 in private contributions. So the first 8 years were funded, the debt service was funded by those four sources. completely, wasn't tapping the general fund, Rick. No impact on the general fund. The last 5 years of the debt service, which we're into now, there's really this one, and then I think 3 more years after that, this next year, the debt will be paid entirely off for the Performing Arts Center. And for each of these years that remains, the debt service dropped from $1 million or so down to $500,000 approximately, and that is being paid for by the RDA, the Redevelopment Agency, the tax increment. So, and that's tax increment from what we call the Parish Gateway Project area, which is on this east side of the freeway. So in just another 4 years, that will be gone, that debt.
Okay. Lastly, I would just like to...
Excuse me, Rick, I should note that Bountiful, during that first 8 years, Bountiful's RAP tax was being used as well as Centerville's RAP tax to help pay that debt service. Okay.
So I think it would be helpful to see, for the public, to see in terms of transparency, what's happening there and how soon that is going to be paid off and what revenues are being generated and so
I would invite you to read my budget message if you haven't done so yet. It's an extension, it's a bigger version of that budget newsletter. It's about 12 pages rather than 2 pages, and it's online on the city website. It's on Novus tonight as the first part of the tentative budget that's posted
and that's
there.
all that's on the Performing Arts Center?
There's a lot of information in there about...
a portion.
Just little parts of it? Well, what I'm talking about, Steve, is having a sheet of paper that says Performing Arts Center, and this is the current status.
The audit report is also online on the city's website, and you can go to the notes of the audit and find the debt there, year by year, what is still owed on the debt for that. Okay.
The difference he's asking, I think, for would be, rather than having to try and figure it out from 2 or 3 places, if we could pull together a summary that laid it out, and then I believe he's further asking for what's happening at the Performing Arts Center right now. One of the difficulties is you've got actually 2 entities. The Performing Arts Center is operated by the theater and by the
Legacy
revenues.
Theater, right? Yeah.
So that is public information. There is a financial statement that's available. Off the top of my head, I can't tell you where you can get it, but we could come up with that. And that is there on an annual basis, and you can get it. The things Steve's talking about are the things that we and Bountiful were involved in getting it started. And they're pretty much independent of us. I mean, we have a very vested interest in that succeeding because we've got a building we've put a lot of money into. We want it to succeed, but their operations are pretty much independent. We do a small amount. Off the top of my head, it's about $15,000 to $18,000 a year that go into their operations. Okay?
5% of the RAP tax.
Yeah.
About 20,000.
But they are independent, and we're not putting any money into maintaining that. That means
we own that building. We own that facility, though.
We own
the
the building.
We maintain it.
But no. They do most
They
of
maintain
the
it?
maintenance.
They
They do the vast majority of the maintenance. They pay the heat, light, they do improvements, everything else. They had a big fundraiser on Saturday. That's where they get a significant portion of their money. They get a portion of their money from tickets. That is pretty much independent. And if you'd like, I will find out and let you know how you can get a copy of that financial
I just think it would be in the public interest, in your interest, and to see a summary page as you described it, Bill. I just hear a lot of people talking about it, and wondering about it. And Steve's suggesting we have to go dig through all this stuff, and we could, I guess, but I think it would be simple to put together a summary page for the Performing Arts Center and for Utopia. Every year since 2010, I think. I may have missed one year. I have come before this hearing to recommend and suggest that we take advantage of our state's provision for a rainy day fund, a contingency fund that is designated for that purpose. Now, I know other cities have that. It's not put into the general fund. It is a designated reserve fund for emergencies. We've never done that. Doesn't appear on this budget. And so I once again think that we ought to be doing that, and we ought to have a reserve fund in the event of a significant need. So thank you.
Thank you. Now, Rick hasn't covered all of the budgets, so anyone else who would like to speak?
Good evening. I'm Jim Higbee. I appreciate also the publication of the summary that was put out in the budget newsletter. And I fortunately did not print out the whole 160-page attachment. Hope nobody else hit print all accidentally. But there is a lot there that we could digest. So I appreciate the transparency that the city has been providing for us citizens. I made note here towards the end of the meeting tonight where you're going to evaluate the possible use of LTAP, Utah State University study for the road assessment pavement management study for a nominal cost of $5,800. I would like to commend that. That sounds like a good use of a nominal fee. Being how I work in the transportation area, I see a lot of effect of money well spent for road maintenance. You can save a lot of money if you'll invest in routine maintenance and also smart construction of original road construction, particularly the use of geotextile between the native subgrade and the sub-base materials. So I'd like to commend the use of that study and offer my free services, if you'd like, to review that assessment study and present my review to the city manager with any recommendations I would have for when that study comes in. Seeing as how I design potholes for UDOT, maybe I'll have some input there.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for your services.
Thank you.
Anytime you say free offer of help, it's not going to get turned down.
I've made a note of that.
Yeah.
Norris Kelly Brown. I live at 2030 North, 725 West, Centerville, Utah. And it was with great interest I read that came out with your billing about the budget. And I see and I really applaud the parks development, and also I read where you're going to work on the frontage road, which is down there by where I live. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up is ever since we've lived in Centerville, which is about 20 years, it seems like the frontage road down there between McDonald's and Farmington ends up being, on the west side of the road, ends up being a dirbus pile. There's always great big piles of asphalt and soil, and I don't know if there's any other place you can put it, but it really is an eyesore when you drive along that day after day to see all that piled up trash and everything on the west side of the frontage road. I was wondering if in part of the development of that redo of the frontage road, if you're planning to do some work on the west side to make it a little more attractive than it is now.
We will get that cleaned up. We had a major drainage project that was awarded year before last, replacing 7 or 8 culverts under the frontage road. And because of some conflicts with utilities, buried utilities, we had with that strung out. We couldn't finish that culvert project for at least another year, and so that's why you've seen some of those things hang around there. Then we've had some other work going on that generates some of that debris, but I acknowledge that it's not a pretty sight. But with this frontage road project, which is really two projects, a federal project and a local project, we will clean up that west side. Now, we're not going to be planting trees. That's a long-term vision, is to improve with trees that west side.
It'd be just nice if it was level.
But if we can, yeah, so that we can keep a brush hog or a mower going down there periodically to control the weeds.
I share your concern. I live in the same area, so I see it every day as well. One of the things that we are doing in addition with this frontage road, adding the bike lane and doing the resurfacing, is I ask specifically that we run some sleeves for water under the road so that we could eventually have some sort of vegetation. My ultimate goal is I don't want to know when I transition into Farmington. I'd rather just have that be pretty all through that corridor. That's my goal.
Yeah, I driving through that area this spring, they had, I didn't know what was the reason. I kept asking, why are they doing that? All that water that was being pumped right into the gutter. We're supposedly trying to conserve water, so I stopped and asked him what was going on, and he said there was a blockage or something on the culvert, and they had to divert the water there. So
yeah. That was groundwater being diverted.
Yeah, just the stream water.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, like Rick was saying, I was really kind of put off in that newsletter about the property tax increase and a way to solve the problem. And, you know, if we have to, population, whatever, I second that. But I was a little bit, the way they mentioned it in the newsletter, I thought, well, you know, that it's always a good way to balance the budget, just raise the taxes. But it kind of is angry to me to the way it was said. And listening to the budget tonight, the other comment I had is with regards to the salary surveys and hiring a consultant. I don't think it's that complex of a deal to look at the cities around us and same size and say, here's what reasonable salaries ought to be. I don't think we need to spend $100,000 or whatever bringing in a consultant to look at this. I would just soon give it to take that money and just give it to the employees. And I was wondering, have we been losing a lot of management talent because of the salary?
No, we've been fortunate to hang on to our management and our employees in general. We have a low turnover. I think that's not unusual for smaller cities to have a high retention rate. But,
well, I applaud.
But we're looking. I'm anticipating. Well, we know that there'll be some of our management being replaced in the next couple of years, next few years, and I think the city would be better served to get those pay ranges up to a more competitive level.
I agree. From what you said tonight, it makes perfect sense, and you know, it's not that we have to compete, but with the cities around us the same size, so we need to get our salaries up to where we can compete. And that's my comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may, I just want to address the property tax one. You don't have to stand up there for that. I'll go on way too long. As one of the proponents of the property tax increase, so you can direct all hate my direction, one of the things when I ran for office is I was really concerned that there's this issue of deferred maintenance in the city when you look at how long it takes to repair the roads, what schedule we're on, the sidewalks. I mean, that came up after I was in office, but one of the things that the council was very unanimous in was the understanding that it's not free, and if you defer, it costs you more over time. I know that now with my shed. I wish I'd painted it 2 years ago instead of now when I need to replace the wall. So I think part of it was it was the pain point. It had been so long since there had been a property tax increase that it was a bit of a shocker. It also came in a year when there were a lot of other taxing entities that decided they were going to fix their structural imbalances. But overall, recognizing that we put that tax on ourselves, I do not regret that. I do like the fact that we're in a position this year to be able to offer additional incentives to hold on to good officers. We're going to be able to look seriously at the sidewalk maintenance. If we had not done it, I think we would have been in a very bad position this year.
Well said. There are a couple more of you. Did you want to speak? No? Okay. Then we'll...
Yeah, can you ask it
at
up
the
here,
mic.
Rick? Just because that large viewing audience of probably 3 or 4 won't hear you.
I appreciated Steve's comment about the road construction for the drainage system under the freeway and so forth. There are so many people out there that are just thinking, when are they going to get this done? You know, this frontage road's a mess. And I have a daughter that lives down in that area, and so they use that frontage road all the time. Have we communicated that problem that you mentioned, the utility conflict and so forth, that's dragged this out to our citizens?
Probably not.
Huh? Probably not?
Probably not, no.
Yeah, I think, I'd just like to suggest that would be a good idea.
We did put in the recent newsletter, the mayor's comments in the newsletter that's coming out. Well, it came out last week, yeah. And then in my budget message, I think I spoke to the frontage road, what we're doing with it. But no, we could do better with informing our residents.
Just a suggestion for the newsletter, so thank you.
Thank you. All right. We'll go ahead and close the public hearing for the tentative budget then. And we need to adjourn to an RDA meeting so that we can talk about the RDA budget. Is that?
Do you want to just table this matter to the next meeting? Is that the
Could we do-
plan?
could we do that?
Well, I was going to raise the question. I've posted the possibility that you would continue discussing potential revisions. You could do that later in this meeting if you'd like, or set another work session if you want. So I think
I know there are some additional things that we wanted to discuss before we adopt the budget. Do you have a preference? Do you want to stay late tonight?
It depends on if we have a
do
lot
want
of
to-
public who's interested in commenting on the RDA budget, because that would be the immediate reason to go to it.
Well, I know we got one here.
So since we do have members of the public, I don't have a problem moving the discussion later.
Down, okay.
And also in deference to our fire chief who's back here waiting, if we wanted to bring his matter forward before we
could do
discuss
that.
those as well, I'm fine with that. There's got to be
we
something
enjoy
better on
having
TV
you
than
here.
this. I pointed at the wrong chief. I lost one.
All right, let's go ahead to the RDA meeting and tackle that budget while we're at it.
Motion to
And
adjourn to convene the
adjourn.
RDA meeting for purposes of discussing the RDA FY 2019 budget with the intent to return to the city council meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, here we are in the RDA meeting. We have some minutes to approve, first off. We have the May 15th RDA meeting minutes and the May 22nd minutes. Does anyone have any changes for that?
Make a motion that we approve the minutes as prepared.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great. We had on the agenda to discuss the corner of 1250 West and Parish, but I understand we don't have the numbers yet from the landscape architect.
That's
Is that
right.
the
I
case?
have made that request, but we don't have them yet, and so I would ask that you just allow this to be delayed until I have some numbers to bring back to you.
Motion
That
to
makes
table agenda item 2 until the next regularly scheduled RDA meeting.
George, would you mind that being until, when we get the numbers, bringing it back? Or because
Well, we're going to have another RDA meeting for budget adoption, right?
We are, yeah, but I
Are
don't.
we not going to have them by that point?
I don't know. I've made a request, and
Okay, I don't have a problem making it as when they become available.
Yeah.
If not on the
We'll
next meeting, that's fine. I'll amend my motion. So motion to table item 2 until the next regularly scheduled RDA meeting or the numbers become available, whichever happens first.
Second.
That still means next time, then.
Pretty much.
That means next time. I'll see what I can get.
Okay. All in favor?
You saw right through that, Steve.
Aye.
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 Did you vote?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. All right. We are to the RDA budget. Steve?
Okay.
Would you like to tell us about it?
Yes, if you have your budget books or you have it online, it's the page 70 of the tentative budget. I forwarded to you an email today from the county, or was it yesterday? Can't remember. Yesterday, late last night, the county sent an email about 6:30 that I forwarded to you this morning,
Telling us the numbers were bad.
telling us they don't have the
Didn't
numbers yet.
Numbers yet.
Now, I looked at my computer just before I came in here, and I saw something had been sent by Heidi, and so there's probably some numbers, but I didn't have time to look at them. So if they affect, to the extent they affect the RDA, I can't tell you what that is. I'll have to apprise you of that by the next meeting. But what you see in the tentative budget column are numbers taken from that projection that I've updated for you recently in an earlier RDA meeting. So it shows the obligations to these various parties, the estimate of what the tax increment would be. It's got a other obligations line of $141,000. That's the total of, for the 3 project areas, the revenues that have not yet been programmed, if you will, for specific purposes. It's the total of all 3 project areas. I'll remind you that the one project area, Legacy Crossing, owes the Parish Gateway project area about that $200,000. So at some point we'll be talking about how you want to address that, on what kind of a schedule, that payback. And then obviously you have another matter pending, for which I assume Nick is interested in, and that's the request from Fred Hale and Chad Salmon about their matter. But you heard me say we didn't have the numbers until tonight regarding the tax increment, so I can't tell you here tonight what's being generated by the various properties within each of those project areas, but I'll put a briefing together for you for the future.
Great.
So there you are. The biggest expenditure in the RDA tentative budget is the annual debt, is the debt service on the Performing Arts Center, as I mentioned a few minutes ago. That's transferred over, that $592,000 is transferred over to the debt service fund and paid out of there. And then we have the additional increment line of the $192,000, that's transferred over to the Utopia Capital Project fund, which is where we're paying the annual amount for Utopia, so that's paying part of that $482,000, and then the rest is coming from the general fund. Unless you want me to explain any of the rest of this, I'd say you could open it up for public hearing.
Okay. With that, we will allow you to come and ask your questions or give your comments. Would anyone like to? No? Okay. Seeing none, then, I'll close the public hearing on the RDA budget. Do we need a motion to return to the City Council?
Motion to adjourn the RDA meeting to return to the City Council meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Welcome back. Okay, so we're at item 7. Let's go.
Number 8 now.
Welcome back. Okay, we will take item 8 now, the public hearing about the additional fence heights. I believe Corey, do you have a staff report for us?
Get off the couch
I
and
think he
come
was
to work.
enjoying that comfortable couch.
Well, he's got friends out there.
Our conversations. So we're on the
We're on
fence.
the additional fence heights.
Good. All right. As you're aware, the council asked this planning staff and the planning commission to look at the additional fence height issue in a comment that was in your open session, particularly the issue of horses and the conflicts that were being raised by the residents in that discussion. We did take the item to the planning commission, I think it's 2 meetings ago now, to discuss the fence height with the planning commission, and they hosted a hearing. There are 3 general concepts that were discussed by the planning commission. The first one is the easy one, do nothing, debate whether we need to do something or not do something. The second option was we do have a provision in the fencing area for multifamily and commercial and that type of development when it's needs some type of buffering, is what we call fencing, is a buffering, to allow up to a 10-foot fence to buffer some of those more intensive uses from the lower intensive uses. So that is a conditional use permit. So the second item was to just simply lump the lower density zones into that process so they could go to the planning commission and discuss going from a 6-foot to a 10-foot height with the issuance of a conditional use permit. The third concept was raised in more of making it closer to a fence where people, right now we don't require permits for fences. We have regulations heights, but you can simply install your fence administratively and it's enforced by complaint if you do something different than the zoning standard. And we do publish a little brochure trying to describe that. So this was kind of a hybrid to find some type of process that would evaluate going above 6 foot. But the concern that staff would raise at that time is you're in your residential areas and 6 foot is the standard height that is normally materials purchase, social expectations, and the behavior of the community. 6 foot is a pretty standard height. The concern was if 10 foot was too high and the CUP issues associated with that, is there something that we could maybe do a little bit higher? And I've always, in conversations behind scenes, said, well, I can see some argument for taller than 6 feet, particularly when you're dealing with maybe a horse or something of that nature. Higher height could be something that might mitigate some of those conflicts. So an 8-foot height was kind of set into standard, and make it a administrative approval by the zoning administrator instead of going to the planning commission and CUP. So it'd be a staff administrative approval, but there were design expectations around that increased height. And it was simply encompassing your rear yard area. So your back lot line, if you want an 8-foot fence, your side lot lines down to where the build line or the back line of the house is, encompass the rear yard with an 8-foot fence, but not run the 8-foot fence through the side yards between homes and out into the street, so that the backyard is more private, and then the sides between buildings didn't have these large barriers, and of course the front yard is that curb appeal place for fencing. So that was an idea of the third alternative is an administrative approval with some criteria. We took that to the Planning Commission. It became clear from my perspective in participating and also reviewing the minutes that the Planning Commission was quite resistive of any increase at all. As they debated some of the issues around it, they liked the more uniformity in the lower density zones. They didn't want the idea of some fences higher than others, how ununiform it could be all around the city in some sense, some doing it, some don't. The issues of light, shading, things of that nature were part of their discussion. And I think as they batted around the different values, to sum it up, I put it in your report, was they felt like this was a sledgehammer to the issues, and it could raise more problems with light, ventilation, people's feelings of neighborhood. Fences make good neighbors, prison walls don't, things of that nature. So they felt it was too strong to use a zoning ordinance holistically around the city and do it. So they ultimately wanted to keep the ordinance as is and rejected any changes to it. I was given a call by a council member, is what about the proposal where you are adjacent to residential low, adjacent to agriculture? Why wasn't that an alternative? Honestly, I didn't bring it up as an alternative. My thought pattern at that time is you have, although it would work for a period of time, I don't know if you've seen the zoning map, you have a lot of islands of agricultural zones. And if you look at our general plan in the city, if you were seeing a future zoning map for those residential areas, it would all be yellow now. There is no specific agricultural preservation in our general plan. There was a concept to study it, but the half-acre zoning in the general plan was too small for agricultural preservation. It said to go study 5 acres about agricultural preservation. That study's never ensued. The city has never pursued an agricultural preservation. So right now, in your existing policies, all properties will eventually transition over time. And the policy is we're not going to do it as a citywide change to the agriculture. We're going to do it piecemeal as owners are ready for it. And so the issue that raises from my concern is, let's say today you have an island piece that does 8 or 10 foot fence, whatever the decision is. Well, as that transitions, that goes away, the properties are rezoned, but the fence remains. And now you have areas that have the 8-foot fences or the 10-foot fences when it used to be a buffer between agricultural and residential, but no longer is. And now you have other areas that are looking at their same neighborhood area and saying, how come they get 8-foot fences, we don't? And you have a future conflict. And so I didn't write a specific whenever it's just along the residential agricultural boundary because it did have a chaotic implementation. So that was the reason why that was not an alternative in the staff report. And so the Planning Commission has recommended to leave the ordinance the same. 6-foot height.
All right, thanks for that report.
So Corey, question on that. So where the current conflict exists between basically a zero buffer between residential and allowed agricultural uses, what is the suggested? I mean, we can say eventually it's not going to be agricultural, but if it's currently agricultural and you have an existing conflict, what is your suggestion on how we address that?
I think that's where you have to decide how much is agricultural an issue in the city. You're going to have conflicts. Anytime somebody raises animals, and we have the conflicts with just raising chickens inside the same zone. So every time you have an agricultural against a residential boundary, you will have those conflicts. It has been predominantly, the view is that the agricultural is looked upon as a little favored place. It's usually some type of open spaces. It's usually people wanting to have some type of hobby places. And when you have those hobby places, you will have the propensity for conflicts. In this case, you do have a conflict where there used to not be a horse, now there's a horse. And so, you know, that value you have to decide. I think you will always have a conflict, whether that horse is pushing on fences, whether it's the dust of somebody riding around an arena, whether it's the noise of the horse, whether it's the smell of the used hay, for lack of better terms. You will have that conflict. So I don't think you can eliminate that conflict. I think you have to evaluate, is agricultural something you're trying to preserve? You're trying to encourage it into the future as a transition? In the discussion with the council member, you know, the point I made is okay, where's your value? The agricultural wants to be preserved because people like everybody else's larger backyards and don't want the development to come in. But you have to ask the question, how many people are in, how many students and how many young people in Centerville are engaged in rodeo activities? How many kids and everybody are in the 4-H? How many are in Future Farmers of America? How much agricultural production are you really producing in the city? And so I think that's the greater value of the conflict is what do you think agricultural should be in Centerville? And if it's large animals, there will be conflict. If it's supposed to be the smaller animals, then maybe it'll be the chicken conflicts that we have. And I don't have a suggestion to solve that, because I think no matter whether it's 10 feet, 6 feet, or 12 feet, you're going to have the country potpourri issues. In the community.
I'm not going to let you off with that one. You're king for a day. What do you do? I mean, we're turning to you as a professional. What would you do given if the city council said, we're delegating the authority to Corey to solve this problem that will create the maximum amount of harmony, what would you do?
Leave it.
Leave it? Okay.
So I have a question. How many fences do you think, if you had to take a guess, could this possibly create? Now, I know that we have probably almost 200 agricultural properties up next to residential, but a lot of those agricultural properties are actually residential too. So I'm thinking probably less than 10 of these fences would ever be, when you're saying we don't have very many horses, we don't have very many of this type of thing.
Yeah,
so I'm thinking by doing this, are we, you say we're getting all these fences all over the town, but we probably would only get 5 or 6 at the very most.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're almost the same place the commission landed, using a sledgehammer to a small amount of problems that would really occur. How many people are really going to have large animals? I think your gut feeling, and my gut feeling would be, is there won't be a lot of people doing that.
Well, especially when you go with
at the same time, you're looking, the policy is broadly assumed everybody's going to do it. So hedging your bet with an ordinance versus setting sound policy is what you have to ask yourself you're trying to do.
But if you went with an 8-foot fence, it has to be engineered, is that correct?
It has to be, it depends on what you build, but it would have to withstand the wind loads. So there has to be either a custom engineering or the fence maker already has a pre-engineered design that has the wind loads. And you
so that's the other thing that's going to limit it, is you've got to have a pretty big problem in order to be willing to put that much money into a fence.
Again, this is why you set policy. Here's all your values.
Well, thanks for letting me put you on the
no problem.
hot seat prior to the public hearing.
I tend to be with the Planning Commission in a little different point of view. These are single-family areas. It's a low incidence of conflict. Setting a broad policy that, could create other problems. I think the amount of problems that are occurring versus the other problems, there might be a disparity of what you expect. From a planning design perspective, fences make good neighbors, but also big fortress walls create that social. I mean, it's why we don't fence 6 foot in our front yard. We want the semi-rural, that's what suburbia is. It's a principled design on semi-rural grass, curb appeal, not the fencing and fortress look.
And you don't feel like we could have that in front of the build line and have the tall fence in the back?
You have the issue of your opposing neighbor and your sunlight to your gardens now being blocked. Now we have that with trees. The argument is you could get that out of trees. Mm-hmm. You have the issue of an engineered wall that is expensive, and something happens with a wind load or a damage, and what's the quality of the owner of the fence going to replace that? You're just trading conflicts in my mind.
Sure. Well, you're also in Centerville. If you have a high fence, you're going to get good neighbors because they're going to help you pick it up in 2 or 3 years when it blows down. So I understand the issues related to the engineering issue.
I have another question. So where we have it for multi-family and commercial, they can go higher. Does that include a public facility?
Yes.
So if somebody lived next to a public facility, they could have the higher fence?
Personally, I'm uncomfortable with a 10-foot, but it's in your ordinance. From my standpoint, I think that's exactly what your multifamily people try to do. They try to go and insert a pocket of multifamily, wall it off with 10 feet. and that doesn't give you a good sense of community from my design standpoint.
Any other questions for now? Okay, this issue is scheduled for a public hearing. So since we've had that staff report, I will open it up for comments.
Andrea Richmond, 327 Windsor Lane. I've lived in Centerville for 25 years, and a horse moved in. There hasn't been one there for over 40 years. And I completely wish my neighbors the best. I have no ill with them. I honestly do wish them the best. But they have completely affected my life, and I feel like I can't really use my backyard. There's 3 people in my family with asthma. We get acute asthma attacks from horses. Our backyard, we take a lot of time to keep it very nice. And we've had a wedding back there. My wall will affect no one. The only thing that the wall in my backyard will do is it'll make me be able to use my yard and not be adversely affected by a horse that can put his, that has the ability to put his head in my yard. I mean, I completely respect their right to have a horse, but I think I should have the right also to not be adversely affected in my entire yard by a horse that has moved in next door. I don't want to take away their right. I just kind of want, well, not kind of, I really just would like my life back and be able to use my beautiful home that we work hard on and that I've lived there for 25 years. And, you know, Corey talked about it being like a prison wall. It's not going to be like a prison wall at all. I think it will, I'm going to make it nice. We're the kind of people that maintain. We've never asked our neighbors for any money for any fence that we've ever built. I think we treat everyone around us kindly with respect, and I just want my life back and be able to use my yard without their horse joining my life. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this? Okay, seeing none, I will close the public hearing and turn it back to the council.
Corey, I have a couple more questions for you.
I have one as well.
Could we do it where we did it agricultural to residential, so we're limiting as much as possible, going 8 feet, and then having it either conditional use or going to the Board of Adjustments so that it doesn't get put up and block somebody's garden? I mean, so the other neighbors would have a say in it if somebody decides to do it.
Well, the answer's split. You can do anything you want, just don't do it with the Board of Adjustment. That's the wrong body to take that to. So the answer is yes, you can create an ordinance that says along these boundaries, you allow it. Now you have the issue of if you put it on, in the case you're talking about, both properties are agricultural. So that's a little bit different scenario in the layout, and this is why it gets complex. If you have a residential low boundary and an agricultural boundary, are you expecting that the higher wall, whatever approval entity it is only along that boundary, or is it down the side yards? If it's in an agricultural area, can one agricultural property have a different design than along the same boundary? Because if you limit it to only the boundary, then everybody inside the agricultural area, we all love horses, for lack of better terms. If you want to do it also inside the agricultural, then is it just the rear yard? Is it just the boundary? So you have to decide what parameter you're trying to set, and is it a multi-parameter expectation? But the answer is you can do anything you want to set by policy. And once you decide a direction, it doesn't matter what I think. We write it for you.
That's so nice of you. Go ahead, Steve.
I'm just trying to be creative here, which may not work. But I hear Andrea saying that the horse putting its head over the fence is an issue. A higher fence, I don't presume, stops the effect of
The dander.
yeah, you know, it still travels over the fence, whatever's affecting, but maybe the head, if your head could be prevented, Andrea seems to be saying that makes a difference. Can somebody build a pergola along their back fence and have some wire grid on it that would prevent a horse from putting its head over? A pergola.
Well, now you're getting into the setbacks of accessory buildings and.
Pergola,
Well,
is that an accessory
let
building?
me take a different spin on this.
Yeah.
I was giving Lisa a heads up. So Lisa, if I have a neighbor who has a dog that constantly comes into my property line, it becomes a nuisance animal, doesn't it? I'm not trying to say this horse is a nuisance animal. I'm just trying to look at this from the horse. We look at this horse case as being very specific, but what controls my property line and the trespass of animals owned by another person? How does that work out?
Well, I think that area is a private matter between the two neighbors. I mean, we have these issues with trees, and there's a variety of case law about who's responsible for the tree when it goes down, where the tree is, whether it's a boundary line tree. But I think that the issues would be similar with pets as a private matter of encroachment or something like that. But that was sort of my thought from the beginning, was that this sounds more like a private matter than something that the city needs to regulate.
Yeah, I think that's reflected in at least one planning commissioner's comments, that there may be other avenues if there is damage being occurred to between property owners to some extent, and maybe not a resolution through zoning ordinance is the best route, but it's a matter of opinion, I'm sure.
Well, I can understand, and I do it from the dog perspective, because I have neighbors who love their dogs. They love them to death, but they never have them on a leash, and it's, sometimes I'll open my garage and there'll be a dog in my garage. I'm like, I don't own a dog. It's not that I'm horribly offended that there are dog owners, but where their rights infringe on my freedoms to be safe and confined in the property that I pay for, I think it's reasonable to have an expectation that your property line, it doesn't make a fortress wall, but you have some expectation that inside your property line you have some limited sphere of control. And if I had an animal that was going under my fence or over my fence on a regular basis that caused me allergies, or if it's a mean breed of dog that causes me to fear, or my children to fear being in their backyard, then I've got a dispute. Now, if I have the capability to mitigate that dispute by having a wall that the dog can't get under because, we'll just say ugly cinder block or something, it's a solid wall that the dog can't get under or can't get over, and I can give a reasonable assurance to my kids, you can go out and play in the yard because that dog can't get to you. I don't know why we wouldn't facilitate that in the city to allow private parties to come to an agreement with some sort of structure that prevents that sort of animal encroachment. I don't see that as a huge conflict. As to whether it would create a bunch of 10-foot walled sections around the city, I just don't see that. It's too expensive with the engineering incurred to do that. You'd have to have a pretty serious reason to want to.
Yeah, I don't argue that. The other side of the argument that I would have, that I struggle with in my own personal life, is that what they're doing with their property makes it difficult for me to even have a garden because it's constantly shaded.
That's a reasonable point as well.
So I don't know which value is best for the community. I think that's what I'm trying to point out. I think that's what the Planning Commission struggled. And I think, with the viewpoint is that there will be some conflicts, and the same argument to a couple of fences versus a couple of people who have horses, you just have to land on one of the sides.
Well, I think we're only looking at 8 feet. We're trying for 2 feet.
Can we tighten this up to be in matters of animal encroachment? I mean, how tight can we make this, Lisa? Because if the issue is we're being too broad, if it's a specific petition related to an issue of an animal encroaching on a property, and that the party wants to take corrective action to prevent that encroachment. I mean, I'd really support people owning animals. I think it's great. I don't want them in my yard or leaving me presents in my yard, therefore I fence my yard. And if they come under my fence or over my fence, I feel that as a property owner, I should have the right to mitigate that to the reasonable extent. I'm not saying put concertina wire on the top of my fence and foxholes, but I should be able to put up a structure that protects my property from what's outside of it. Otherwise, the fence has no purpose.
Yeah, but I think you make a great point, but here's all the other points. Trees, sprinklers, kids, balls flying over the fence, shooting arrows over the fence for target practice.
And,
Oh, no, we're
and
not
I'll be
allowed to shoot
interested,
arrows in the city.
I'll be interested to hear Lisa's legal perspective, but from a policymaker perspective, I would say, but the animal yard conflict is temporary and the fence is permanent or semi-permanent. And
For Centerville, it's 3 to 5 years on the fence.
but it's really just, in my view, I love to hear residents' perspectives and the issues that they're dealing with. And then I always take those complaints and those concerns and the things that I hear, and I plug it into policy, and I ask myself, if we changed policy for this one concern I hear, does it make the city better overall for all of the residents in all of the situations that it would apply to? And that's what makes this situation difficult, is that it's easy to sympathize and empathize and want to do something, but it's more of a principle question here. What is the city's role in solving all of these individual problems? And that's what Corey's answer is: trees and kids and balls and all of those things. And if we get in the business of applying a policy change that overall isn't agreed as a positive for the entire city, then I think we're overstepping our bounds.
But we are in the business of creating peaceful coexistence. That's the whole reason we're elected to be here. Now, whether or not the policy needs to apply to the entire city, I'll grant you that. I don't think it does. I think it should be on a case-by-case basis, and there has to be mitigating circumstances that would create the need. But I just don't see this as suddenly a carte blanche license for everyone to go put up a 10-foot fence that lives next to a horse. A lot of people aren't going to do that because they like the horses. But in this specific case, I can see that issue. I would also have the same issue in kids or other things related to, if there is a serious conflict between neighbors, we deal with that anyway. Accessory dwellings, that's a conflict between neighbors. We want to bring that back up. We talk about building height and setbacks. These are all conflicts that the city has to manage. As to whether this being a one-off instance that there may be nothing else like it in the city, possible. But isn't all legislation started from an incident and a dispute that has to be resolved?
Yeah, I think the point that I'm just making from the planner is these are values. So I don't think there's a right or wrong. It's a preference of where you want to land. The concern on a planning standpoint from a policy is that zoning gets further and further and further in trying to regulate behavior. And land use law is not really built around trying to regulate behavior. It's about the built environment, not about the behavior. And so you have this constant struggle where community comes and says, use your police powers, and zoning was to be about land use and patterns, and we've gone from separating the bomb plant from the residential area to buffering commercial to residential, to buffering multifamily to residential, to buffering single family from agriculture. We keep encroaching further and further and further and further into saying, well, we've solved the larger issues, now let's start micromanaging the behavior. And I think that's why you see the hesitant. We're getting closer to behavior issues between uses and not so much the general zoning and police powers of what land use planning is about. And that's the only thing, is you're feeling that tension now, and that's where you're at, feeling that tension.
But I would also say that you're regulating behavior by saying a 6-foot fence creates a better community environment. That's regulating behavior. Some people, I've been in other countries where if you don't have an 8-foot high wall with some sort of additional protection on it, your neighborhood isn't good.
Well, I think fence is a design, not a behavior.
But what I'm saying is that some of these protective measures, like there's certain areas in Puerto Rico, if you don't have a good iron grill work on your house everywhere, you're living in a slum. Even though when you look at it from our perspective, you'd say, hey, that looks like a militarized neighborhood. It's not the case. So I think that regulating the behavior is part of this whole thing. I don't know that you get away from it.
I don't think they're separate. I'm just saying that's where you're seeing the tension, and you have to pick that value. And I want you to approach it. I'm giving you the counter argument so that you make that full disclosure or discussion and discourse. That's all I want you to.
Sure.
To be
and I'm not trying to change your opinion. I'm just saying that this is definitely one of those where the legislators have to wear the big hat and make a decision that probably will not make everyone happy. But
I'm not seeing a huge conflict to having some flexibility on a case-by-case basis to continue peaceful coexistence. What I would hate to have happen is to have two neighbors who have different uses, agriculture and residential, go to loggerheads in court all the time, or calling the police about, hey, this animal is trespassing in my yard again, and using up other resources when a reasonable accommodation could be made between private parties that the city, frankly, I don't think should prevent from happening. That's the way I'm looking at it.
And again, those are your value judgments.
So we could do conditional use if we decided to do it.
One of the difficulties,
Bill, can you speak into that?
one of the difficulties, I presume we all got an email from someone this afternoon. Not only do we have this conflict between residential and agricultural, but we've got some people that have a conflict between commercial and residential where there is no transitional space, saying, gee, if they can have it, why can't I have it, or can I have it? And I have mixed emotions. I think I see this as a no-win situation. I'm not sure what we do to make everybody happy. But I think the problem is bigger than just the agricultural.
I agree with you on that. I think it is bigger. It's some of this may be if we were to look at something that allowed for conditional use or some tightening to the triggering conditions that allow a taller fence or a different type of barrier to allow those two uses to peacefully coexist as much as they can, whether that's a commercial to residential buffering or it's an ag to residential. I think it's worth exploring. I don't know that it's going to prop up everywhere. It's expensive. Fencing is ridiculously expensive. And I just don't see people saying, hey, I can now put up a 10-foot fence, I'm going to do it. And if I just don't see that.
That email that we got was what I was asking Corey about, and they already have the right to a 10-foot fence between a public facility and a private home.
But does the private homeowner have the right to build it, or does it need to be built as part of the site plan for the commercial property? That's my understanding of how I read the ordinance.
Yes, it's the property that's zoned that where the fence is built, so the public facility is where the taller fence would go. And it's the higher intensity over time, when you look at our ordinances, whether non-conforming or new development, that have to buffer to the lower intensity. So
if I lived next door to it, I couldn't choose to build the fence because their intensity was bothering me?
Right, so you would go over and convince them that you would participate in building the higher fence and see if they petition for it.
See, I find that to be really tough.
Yeah.
If I'm willing to...
Seems backwards.
Yeah, I think it's backwards. If I'm willing to invest the money to improve my quality of life on my property in a buffering situation, I don't know why we would want that not to be the case.
And if I was the one bothering you, why would I buy the fence?
Yeah, again, zoning doesn't cover all problems and issues. And this is the tension, and you're going to hear it from me because I'm one of the few planners that stays down watching the property rights. The culture of Utah is to favor the property rights owner and the government less and less regulation. Now, we can debate all night what that means, but I'm just giving you the issue that each time you take a complaint and an issue and solve it, each time you have to ask the same question: is this solution worth the broader value? And you just have to decide how much regulation do you adopt, and that's all I'm pointing out. And if you want to say, here, Corey, is the situation I want addressed, adjacent to uses that are different zones, or what about people inside of agricultural zones those who don't have horses and do have horses? Do you want that? Do you want it to be a planning commission approval where they go in and host a public hearing and all of those things before a person knows whether they can do a fence? Because the planning commission, they're supposed to approve it, but what are the mitigating needs to have it approved? Do you want it to be more an administrative right where it just says X, Y, and Z, you get it? Those are the things you have to decide.
So I like what you just said. I would like to do less government involvement in personal property rights and say, build your fence.
Okay, so then the question, if
How can we-
everybody
how
were
can
to
we make that
agree,
happen?
what is the situation and what creates the parameters of when that fence could be built?
Well, I think I've been pretty.
I think George's animal encroachment is a
nuisance
good-
animal or identified large animal nuisance problem.
Now Lisa's pulling up the mic because
I know she's
individual.
That's why I'm looking this way, not that way.
Adopting regulations for only a specific issue can be very problematic.
Can we phrase that differently? Can we say loosening regulations for specific problems?
Yes.
Because we already regulate the
Because I
fence.
think we already regulate, and we're trying to loosen the regulations and say, you have more options to deal with this problem.
Yeah,
And
but
I think you just have to consider the policy considerations that you've talked about, but I do see some concerns with either doing this as a conditional use permit or saying if your neighbor has a dog or a horse or those are not things that they're temporary, and I don't think it's setting good policy because someone could have a dog or a horse for a month and then you have a wall. So it's not based upon. I think if you're going to do it, you're saying, okay, if you're adjacent to ag or you're adjacent to commercial or, you know, because somebody could be allergic to the hay or whatever they're farming. It's, you know.
Yes, I've always been told if you don't want, like the smell of spring fertilizing, don't live next to a farm. I think that's fair. I think it's also fair on the flip side to if you are willing to make an investment to mitigate on your own property, it does not, and this comes back to the conditions, what makes it onerous to the neighborhood or otherwise. I don't see a conflict in, we regulate this everywhere else. We regulate fence height now, we regulate setbacks. We have all this. This is just, I think, adding triggering logic for buffering between zones, not inside an agricultural zone. I'm sorry, if you buy agricultural and they raise chickens and you have horses, you bought agricultural right next to agricultural.
But that's the point I'm trying to make is the person approaching you is zoned agriculture. The user is agriculture.
Oh.
One more time?
Okay. I thought, you were having
These are,
residential.
both properties are zoned agriculture. That's the situation you have with the person that is addressing you.
How can it be agricultural if they don't have a half acre?
If you look at the map, and maybe we need to look at it to correct it to make sure, but my understanding is that both properties are zoned agriculture.
See, I've always been under the understanding we were dealing with a residential
You can have the resident point out to you on the map what it is, but
well, if you're gonna have a stunner like that, you got to bring it out earlier in the discussion.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Well, I tried to bring that earlier. It just wasn't
You were
heard.
being too obtuse. I did not get that from the discussion.
He did mention it. I just don't think we focused.
Give us a moment, we'll get there.
Yeah, we'll let the resident point out where they live. They're on 400 West, right? Could be wrong, but that's what I was 400 West.
The adjacent properties on 400 West, south of
400 West, south area.
south of Porter.
So let's make sure.
So here's Windsor, right here. This is what we're talking about right here.
We're talking right there. Okay, right in that area.
So we were up in here. This is ag. That's her piece there, and and this is the neighbor. Is what I understood.
My house is not agricultural.
This pie shape with this house here. And I could be wrong, the wrong house, but I was told it's this home. They own this piece, and this person's put the horse there.
Is that your house?
I can't tell.
Come up here and look.
There's an address.
When I bought my house, it was 0.2 acres. That's
Yeah.
not agricultural.
But come up and look and see if that's
Yeah,
where your house is.
3327 West. Yeah. Agriculture, I think she owns this piece of property from what I understood. You can check if you click the map for ownership, and this is a piece of the horse.
The horse is on the south of me. It's not in that.
Oh, this one?
My home is not agricultural. I did buy a piece of my neighbors directly back of me, a piece of their yard, so maybe that's why you're confused.
I'm just going off the officially adopted zoning map.
Okay, well, that makes sense. I mean, in order to have the supply in the scenario I'm thinking about, it would have to be buffered residential to agriculture is the way I envisioned this originally. I have a hard time trying to regulate inside an agricultural zone.
Why would my property be in green? I bought 0.2 acres in Windsor subdivision, and it is residential, it is not agricultural.
That whole subdivision was all done at one time. Why would they leave one lot?
That does look pretty
Agricultural.
odd.
That looks like, so you said you purchased ag land from your neighbor?
I purchased a little bit of land in my backyard from my neighbor directly west of me, and it looks like they made my entire lot agricultural. My lot is residential. I can guarantee you, look at the subdivision. So I don't know why suddenly it becomes all green. It's not.
However, I would note that that part that was purchased was probably ag.
Right. But not the original. So where are we talking, where is the horse?
The horse is on the south of me.
It must be 535. Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for the history of the map because I don't have specific knowledges about this property. But this is the adopted zoning map.
It's incorrect.
Whether it's previously or not incorrect, it doesn't matter. Today, that's the adopted map.
It matters if it's incorrect.
Now, whether you want to rezone it and fix all of that, if it was at some point in time, whether that piece was added when they changed the map and decided, oh, you added it for, I mean, I can't explain the history, but it's officially zoned agricultural.
Would
If
it
you
say
want to
that
fix
on-
that problem and rezone it to something else in the future and then address the boundary issue, that's a possibility. I just want you to know this is the map.
Would that show on her taxes? Does it show what your zone is?
No, generally just shows the
I thought your
acreage.
taxes were cheaper on agricultural.
It does show it on, I think it shows it on that. If you right-click, you can pull up the property tax. It'll say property tax info, no, up at the top, those first two links.
right here.
Yeah, right there, just click on one and it'll pull up a summary of the tax. Oh, it didn't, yeah.
I usually don't
Yeah.
see zoning on. The only place we see zoning is our map, not the county records.
Oh, maybe they don't. I thought they did.
I don't see any designation.
Maybe not. But our map is the official map of what that property is zoned.
Well, then I'll change it to residential because that's incorrect. I bought in a subdivision. I don't know who turned it green on me, but you certainly didn't. You're taxing me the same amount of taxes as, I'm definitely not getting taxed on agricultural property. Look at my taxes compared to the other taxes. So if I have to, I'll just make sure that it's correct, because that is incorrect. We live in a residential neighborhood. 0.2 acres is not agricultural.
It's not.
I did add to the 0.2 acres. I don't even know how much it was. It wasn't very much at all, just a little bit on my backyard, but, so I don't know why that happened.
I think what would be best is, I hear sentiment from the council that they want staff to craft reasonable policy to allow some flexibility when there are two different zones abutting each other. And I don't think that problem's going to get solved tonight. I think that we would need Lisa and Corey to really be specific and work on a couple different options to present to that. So I would suggest that for tonight, we direct staff to come up with those options, the options they consider most reasonable for broad policy, and come back.
I'd even go further on that and then have that go back up through the planning commission, because I don't want to divorce this, our sentiment from the planning commission ability to weigh in on it, because they had some very strong feelings. I get that, but I also want to make sure that it's cast against what has been said here tonight, so that they can make consideration around the whole issue, because I value their input. So if we could actually do that, Tammy, if you would be amenable to adding that as part of the the motion, I would
I'm
second
not
it.
making the motion, I'm just saying I think that would be the next step for tonight.
Oh, I thought you were making a
No.
motion there.
I would entertain a motion. if you'd like to.
Well, then I will make a motion to direct staff to establish first pass at guidelines to allow for private, I don't know how we want to phrase this, private buffering structural enhancements to fencing, or I guess you'd have to include other barrier items, trees, hedges, whatever.
Well, that's that, we don't
wanna get into
deal that with any of that. We don't.
We don't maintain a hedge height.
Nope.
No.
So if they put a 12-foot hedge in there,
She could do that.
yeah.
So what he says is a motion to remand the issue back to the planning commission, if that's what you want, I'm hearing.
Right.
And then the idea would be to look at additional heights. You decide whether you want to cap to look at the additional height or just leave it open. And then on what situation parameter do you want us to look at?
And I think we want 8 feet. I mean, the planning commission's not going to go higher, so I think we need to not shoot ourselves in the foot, but let's look at 8 feet. But let's talk to them about just agricultural next to residential.
Well, I disagree with that, because what I heard from the council is one of your concerns is the example of a residential next to a commercial and having the ability to buffer
We already
there.
have that.
No, because
Not on the
it's only the
residential.
commercial's right
Only the commercials,
to
right?
do it.
So I never finished the motion, so I'm not sure what it is now. But no, I'm trying to incorporate what you're saying because I think it's useful. So we remand it back to the planning commission to discuss. You want it to go both ways, right? So it goes commercial or residential has the ability to create the barrier.
Well, right now, the way the ordinance is drafted is it says it allows the planning commission to allow an additional height in certain areas, whether it's rear yard or side yard, for the various zones, starting with AM and RM and RH, and then going into the commercials. So what you're looking at is adding
Adding
additional height in
AL
either
and
in the
RM.
AL and the RM.
Well, and the difference there is it's through the site plan process.
True,
That's a big difference.
because these others don't.
I mean, what we're
we don't have
asking
site
for
plan
is a
it.
very specialty,
So you would have
order.
to provide a process.
I'm not asking for it. If I were to make a motion tonight, I would say motion to approve the
But
recommended denial, but
Make the motion. I mean,
I'll make
you
a
can
motion
it.
that we approve the recommended denial from the planning commission.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second?
Okay. So then what I was saying is, based on what I've heard, knowing that my motion wouldn't get a second tonight, that if we want this problem to possibly be solved through ordinance, then let's direct staff.
So I'm going to make a motion that we remand this to the planning commission to discuss alternatives for barrier buffering in the AL, the agricultural low and residential low zones, with the intent to allow the planning commission to give guidelines back to us in a future work session, not to, I'm trying to pick a date. I would like to get this done this year. The planning commission has other things going on, so before November of
Oh, November, that's a long time.
well, they've got other items on the agenda. So this is the problem with trying to make it a long, lengthy motion. I need to put a time parameter around it.
And why a work session, if I might ask?
Well, we have the option of we can have the planning commission send us something forward, and that's assuming they watch most of this evening and get the intent, or we can communicate it together. And I think we work pretty well with the planning commission in a work session to cover this ground pretty quickly. I don't feel good just saying throw it over the wall to the planning commission and let them figure out what the intent was. So that's why I'm looking at possibly bringing this back in a work session for an approval. So let me back
Can
up.
we approve things at a work session?
No.
No, but we can craft what's going to go forward to the next one. So I'm going to back up.
Well, what's our work session schedule?
Well, I was going to say, do we have another one with the planning commission that we could just piggyback that one on? Because it probably won't take a full work session.
So maybe I'll restrict the motion just to having Corey and Lisa work on specific guidelines that can be presented to the next planning commission, joint planning commission, city council work session to take place before November.
But I think we want them to look at 8 feet for the agricultural. I don't want to lump it in with Walmart, commercial,
Sure.
12
Okay.
feet. So I think we need to have different, if you live next to Walmart won't build your fence, I think you should have a right to build your fence. I mean, I don't know why Walmart should have a right to keep you out, but you don't have a right to keep Walmart out. So I think that needs to be looked at, but on the other hand, I think we need to, a Walmart fence is 12 feet, that's fine, but a agricultural would be 8 feet.
It's 12 or 10?
What is it? Isn't it 12, Corey?
10.
Is it 10? Okay.
Okay, so I'm trying to figure out how to incorporate this into one statement.
I would just say this. Can I make a motion to amend the motion, or do I need to wait till that motion has a second?
Well, since I've never really finished the motion,
I'm going to make a motion.
It's being authored, so make a
I'm going to make a
we'll see if we
motion.
can make it work.
Okay, do you mind if I just
Sure,
take
go
a stab
for
at
it.
it? For tonight, I'm just going to make a motion to direct staff to come back with ideas about buffering with fencing. And let's have a discussion about maybe other communities who have addressed this, but the general idea of when there's a conflict between two uses and what has happened in other situations, or what staff might recommend as possible reasonable policy solutions with buffering with fencing. And I would leave it up to staff to tell us when they can fit that into their schedule.
Well, I think you're now stepping beyond the noticings. So you have to decide whether you want to address this issue that we've talked about with the ag and the RL issue, because that's what's noticed. If you want to step broader and have a larger discussion, we have to retake it to the Planning Commission, all those things.
Which
so
I think was the
That's what you're
intent I
saying.
was hearing. And so maybe
so rather than say ideas, I mean, that's a larger picture.
So for
more
tonight-
analysis.
Right.
And bringing it back. Is it just a discussion with the council, and then we go back and decide what we're going to try to amend and not amend?
Yeah, so
is it
tabling
more
this.
of a work session with the council?
Tabling this for tonight, and then more of a discussion based on what you've heard in response to what the Planning Commission recommended.
Well,
And
the
then-
tabling, I'm just trying to keep things so it stays clear legally, and I'm sorry I'm stepping on Lisa's toes. If you're tabling something, there's a narrow window that you're tabling. And so you have to answer that narrow window.
That narrow window.
Then if that narrow window is not sufficient, then you need to close the narrow window and go back and restart the
Right.
broader window.
If the council would be amenable to seconding and voting on my original motion, since we have discovered anyway that we need a zoning change for this to be a buffering between zones issue anyway, right? So that's going to take some amount of time. So how about if we just accept the denial of this specific request, accept the recommendation for denial of this specific request, but then it sounds like the council is interested in solving not only this specific problem, but what if I lived next to Commercial High and didn't have the right to build a fence? The buffering issue.
Yeah, do you want to broaden it to a buffering standard?
That's what I heard.
I'm really looking at it as a
Yes and
buffering
no.
standard, is what I'm looking at. But what I need in my mind is some sort of time box around this, because we could analyze this for a very, very long time. And although we may not have perfect legislation the first time around, it's always easier to tear up a draft and make adjustments to it if you have a draft. So that's what I'm looking at, is trying to look at the reasonableness of what the Planning Commission has going on, what's already on their schedule, and making sure that we can return this in a reasonable and timely fashion. I don't want to park this issue for multiple years.
Correct. And I feel like making the window bigger is unfairly postponing for this case.
But in this case, we have discovered that there's an agricultural to agricultural, so there's no buffering between zones issue. So we got new information tonight, which changes this case as it is brought to us tonight. That's why I feel very comfortable dismissing this case and then looking at it a little more broadly in a timely manner and letting the other things that need to change to make it apply to what we're looking at happen.
Lisa, is it possible to go back to when this subdivision was created and see which lots they had and what they were petitioning for in the first place?
Well, I think we could look back at the zoning, but again, that, it's represented on our zoning map. So regardless of how it was zoned that way, it would require a rezone. It requires the city council to rezone it and, you know, to look at the adjacent properties and the uses.
Even if someone
Well, I don't think there will be
clicks
an
the wrong
issue.
color code.
I don't think there will be an issue with the
map.
rezone happening, right? I don't imagine that. So, but since we have what we have on the table.
Does she have to go through the whole cost and time of petitioning for a rezone if somebody's clicked on green instead of yellow?
Well, could I make this point again? If she bought that piece of property and attached it to her lot, or it's next to her lot, I have a hard time believing that that was residential. Was
Right.
agricultural
Okay.
because
Okay.
it was purchased out of an agricultural piece, so
And you
even
can't
if,
divide a lot by a zone boundary line either.
so it doesn't change.
So why would her whole lot turn ag rather than that strip turn residential?
Right, I'm just saying that's what's represented on the map, and in my opinion, it requires a rezone, but you could do some lengthy research, certainly, but
That's harder
you're
than
still,
rezone.
you're probably not gonna answer the question, and you're gonna need a rezone.
Yeah.
So I think through all this discussion, I've come up with a
Okay, let's hear
reasonable motion. I'm going to go for it this time around. I want to remand this application back to the Planning Commission to, with the instruction to staff to add additional language to the zone text amendment to incorporate buffering between agricultural low, residential low, and residential all zones and commercial high.
Or just commercial, just commercial high?
Oh, yeah, we can go,
about
yes, that's a better amendment. Thank you.
What about commercial very high, which is the
Commer-
Home Depot
to-
situation?
To readdress the text amendments for buffering between zones, agricultural, residential, and commercial, through physical barriers. I think that
There's
makes
a
a motion
motion?
somewhere in there.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there further discussion?
No, I think we've already beat it to death.
All righty, and look, we're getting down there in time. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Corey.
Corey?
Just so you know, it has to be delayed because you've now opened the window beyond what was noticed, so we'll have to reset the clock, re-notice, and come back. So
Right.
we can move it along, we have to,
Well, you notice in the final
Sooner would be
motion, I
better.
didn't put any time box around it. I'd like one, but I didn't, so.
but I understand you want it back as soon as
As soon as
possible,
possible.
so we'll do that.
And
Okay, thank you.
And could I make this suggestion to Andrea? Even though you may feel like your lot, your .2 acre lot was really residentially zoned, and it may have been rezoned by mistake, but the piece you bought, I would assume, was agriculturally zoned, and so you need to go through a rezone anyway, and I would suggest you pursue that for both pieces.
Do you know what total acreage you have?
.32 is what this shows. Yes. Apparently. Is that right?
Have my taxes been, I'm sorry, have my taxes been wrong then?
Don't ask me that.
Yeah, you might check on that before you get it rezoned.
Yeah.
You might.
Maybe the horse is not the big issue.
Your taxes are on the value of the land and the structure. To get an agricultural exemption, to get the lower, you have to be in a green belt, and the green belt has a whole set of other standards.
And if those are still two parcels, they need to be combined into one, because it appears that one is a landlocked
Yeah.
parcel. I'm not sure how it was created.
Looks like a flag lot ADU problem.
It's like a landlocked parcel.
Good. Okay.
And you thought it was going to be an easy night, huh?
Well, we're 10 minutes to 10, and we're only
An hour and a half.
hour
behind.
and something behind. Thank you. Pushing on to item number 9, the one that our chief has stuck around for, fireworks restriction area map. Lisa, do you want to explain why we're looking at this again after we passed a forever, this is the standard last year?
Yes, and I will try to be as simple as possible. The state legislature adopted some more amendments regarding fireworks and the areas that cities can restrict from fireworks. In my opinion, those were beneficial. Most of those were beneficial amendments, broadening the areas that we can include in our fireworks restricted area. It used to just say environmental conditions, and now it says historic or existing hazardous environmental conditions, and then they also included the language of dry grassland. So it used to talk about mountainous areas and other things, but we all know foothills with just the
winter wheat.
Yes, is very dangerous and a fire hazard. So, and they also said that you can add, if you know, they're trying to encourage easy lines. So rather than saying all of this area has to, you know, match this finding, you can actually draw a straight line, and they understand that some areas may not be hazardous, but in order to make it an easier boundary line. Now, last year, as you mentioned, we adopted an ordinance where we tried to make this permanent, to say, look, this is our fireworks restriction area. I don't think that this was technically required, but it's my preference given the new statute, because they say if we're going to designate these areas, we need to do it with a map. And in our ordinance, we just said, go see the city recorder. I would like to make it more transparent, easier for people to find, and therefore I'm just suggesting add another section in our zoning code that we can all just send a link to people. Here's our map. You know, you don't have to find it on our website. It's there. So that's my recommendation, because they're saying you have to have a map. We have to give that map to the county by May 1st every year. And they also added a lot of requirements for retailers. They have to post the map. So hopefully this is a good thing. I think they're just trying to get the word out to people that are buying fireworks, that there's restricted areas, and also providing some realistic opportunities for cities to restrict firework discharge in areas that are hazardous. So I'm just recommending this change where we say, here's the map, and also designating and adding the words existing or historical hazardous environmental conditions. Now, the one thing that I find problematic with the state amendments is that they say the fire chief can write this letter saying it's existing or historically hazardous areas. But then it also says that the legislative body, if we're going to have an area that's restrictive, that we have to make a finding every, something like 2 out of the last 5 years that those conditions existed. I'm just recommending we rely on the fire chief, and somebody's going to have to keep track of every 2 out of 5 years that we get that letter. What's probably easiest is if the fire chief can just send us a letter every year, we put it in the file, and we've met our burden. And I think we just hopefully will not have to amend this ordinance every year.
So that sounds excellent. Is there more area in this than there was?
No, we are leaving the map. The intent is to leave the map exactly the same. This is just putting it in our municipal code where we can find it.
Excellent.
I like the ordinance, but there's a piece missing that I think would be really great, and that's retailers inside the city limits must post the boundaries. So we have pop-up retailers, we have Walmart that sell fireworks, but kids can ride up, buy their fireworks, and go off, and there's no noticing of any sort of restriction about where you can or cannot light these off. So I would like to have this amended to include a posting requirement for retailers in Centerville, that they're required to post the restrictions.
Well, I'd like to think about this because a lot of this area is preempted by the state law. They're restricting what municipalities can do because they've regulated in this area. So I just want to find the posting requirements, because I believe they already added that as a state requirement on retailers.
Then I've never seen that. Is that with the new legislation?
Yes.
Okay, because I was going to say, I've never seen that anywhere before.
Right. Let's just see. I didn't highlight that because that was for the retailers. Okay. Now, this is all new that the county has been burdened with the task. We have to send our map to the county, and then the county has been burdened with the task of providing a county-wide map. based upon all the maps that it receives. And they have to provide that map to each retailer that sells fireworks within the county and to the state fire marshal, and publish the map on the county's website. The retailer that sells fireworks shall display a sign that's clearly visible to the general public in a prominent location near the point of sale for all boys on their bikes. He added that. Indicates that the legal discharge dates and times, which have also been changed this year, the criminal charges, and also they added civil liability. You're going to be responsible for the cost of any damage, outside legal times, and within the area within which the fireworks are prohibited. So it's state law, they're taking care of it, the county's responsible, and every retail firework has to put all of this language. I don't know how, they're gonna have big posters.
That's going to be completely
And
incomprehensible.
how's the county going to do all this?
Sorry,
Is there
and the map that the county provides. The retailers are required by state law to already post that.
So we can't add to that in Centerville you have to use, you could post the county one, great, but you have to post a city one in addition?
I would caution you when, I think that the fireworks area is preempted since they've regulated this area. They have a specific state statute. Maybe we could, but I'd rather just see how this new state law works and let them post it. I think there's significant requirements already in place.
So I think the fire chief's first question when something burns down is going to be, did you see the map and did you understand it?
No, I'm just going after the civil.
You're just going after the civil?
And if the chief would like to add anything, he's certainly welcome to. We appreciate him sending us the letter every year.
Chief, am I being overly restrictive? Is it not going to help, or is it just a lost cause to try and educate?
Yeah, I think that might be it. With the requirements of the map from the county, I think that's, you might get into what happened last fire season, where cities were getting in trouble about overstepping their bounds according to state legislators. So
fair enough.
That's where this new legislation came from this year, was because of last year's fire season. And we are not changing any of the boundary. Boundary remains the same. And as Lisa said, it is, they have changed the dates of discharge. So that is also new. And all that is posted on our website as well.
Were the dates increased or reduced?
Reduced by a couple days on each.
Each holiday
The 4th
was
and the 24th.
reduced.
So what is it now?
From 7 down to 3, isn't it, each holiday?
The new dates are
It's 3 each holiday. Now it's 3
July
total.
2nd through July 5th and July 22nd through July 25th.
So 4 days.
That is
7
reduced,
down
wow.
to 4, isn't it?
Those are the new dates. And the time it's 11 to 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. And then on the night of the holiday, so the 4th or the 24th, it's till midnight.
Okay.
And I've not known a night when it didn't go right to midnight, or a little bit after.
Not that we need to keep you, but I'll just say this. We are anticipating a heavy fire season. I've typically don't put the brush units on the CAD system with dispatch until June. They were put on in April because of the fires we have already had. We've had 2 in Centerville already, not in the restricted area, but just in grasslands. So it is very dry.
Were the people started?
Started by things being thrown from vehicles. So we are anticipating a significant or heavy fire season. So we had a fire on Sunday at Twin Hollow Park, or Cheese Park, from what I kind of know it as. So 1300 North and 13th East in Bountiful. And when I've been driving, the foothills were anywhere between, on me, I'm 6 feet tall, waist to chest high on the cheatgrass already.
Wow.
So.
Well, a very wet spring to 90 degrees on June 4th.
Yeah, I think there's a misconception about all the rain that we've had, that it's really done a lot of good, and it really hasn't. It has not done anything.
Well, it gives us the tall grass,
So,
is what
it
I'm
does.
saying, but then that
Yeah.
grass dries out real quick.
We're already hearing things about echo being down and water locations and reservoirs and things like that, so.
All right.
And I would motion to adopt ordinance 2018-13 as stated.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks for sticking around.
Have a good night. Thank you.
Mayor,
We have been going 3 hours.
Yeah, I was going to
Would you
make a
like to
suggestion.
have a brief break?
Could I make another?
Because we will be.
Ask a question, a suggestion for management of time here. Do you want to possibly consider postponing the cemetery issue and so Bruce doesn't have to wait?
I could certainly table that without a problem.
Yeah.
Bruce, would you prefer to table that or wait through Randy's subject and then take it up here tonight?
But what's your
You get your
preference?
choice.
20.
Okay.
Double
All
that,
right,
make
then
20 or
let's,
30.
let's have a 5-minute break. Thank you.
Really?
I'll wake you up.
Well, you're
You've done
next.
this long enough, you can tell us in your sleep, right?
You're the first thing after the break,
I
Randy.
could tell when Randy got here because our one person that was watching YouTube went off. So.
Well, you were the other one.